Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is distorted reality in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 15, The Deserter. She moved like a dancer. She was ethereal, glistening, shining, illuminating. He could sit there for hours using all different words to describe her, yet none of them seemed to do her justice. Her pond was clear in the moonlight, giving the impression she was some kind of nature spirit. He hid in the bushes, leaning his head against his arm, just watching with a faint smile on his face. He missed simple enjoyments like these. She never knew he was there, but it was better this way. She wouldn't have to know the depth of his feelings. Not yet. And yet, Toph knew. She sensed his heartbeat whenever Katara was around. She knew when he walked off to find her training alone. He used to go under the pretense to protect her, since it was dangerous for them to be alone these days. Toph didn't buy it. Of course she didn't. It didn't take the Master Earthbender to know that Katara could handle any trouble by herself, especially under the light of the moon. They were a little older now, each day a battle of survival in the world ridden with war. The memory of her lips on his felt like so long ago. It had only been once, an impulse, but ever since the first kiss on the day of Black Sun, she never mentioned it again. The war took precedence in their lives. They had no time for love anymore. All of them, and most importantly Sokka, had learned the hard way with the loss of Suki and everyone else they cared for. As his mind wandered, Katara seemed to have spotted him. From her position on the pond, she touched one of her many ribbons of water and attacked the figure in the bushes with a twirl so smooth she could have still been dancing. She had grown clever as much as she became more beautiful over the years. With a cry, Aang fell back as she doused him with the water. Katara seemed to glide over to him, ready to attack again, but her water fell when she saw the person's identity. Aang. She tilted her head, confused. Her almost luminescent blue eyes came into his view, and he grinned weakly. "Hello," he said, in an attempt to be nonchalant. Katara gave him a curious, amused smile. "I was just coming to check up on you. Well, somehow, I caught the almighty Avatar off guard. You should have been more careful. I thought you were someone else, and I could have seriously hurt you." "That's okay," he said, standing up with a smile. He seemed to reserve them only for her these days. He trusted her waterbending. It would never, ever harm him. She was much too gentle and caring. He had seen her fierceness in battle, but with her family, she was a different person. For Katara, waterbending was something to be cherished. It was part of the reason why he didn't bend water as much as the other elements. That element belonged to her. "Come on, let's get back to camp. You're all dirty now," she said to him. And together, they returned to the rest of their family, walking side by side. He wasn't shorter than her anymore. Aang woke up happier that morning. His sleep was much more pleasant than usual, but he couldn't remember for the life of him what he had dreamt that night. His better mood didn't go unnoticed by the other members of his traveling group. "You're looking unusually chipper this morning," Ty Lee chirped, handing him a bowl of sweet grains for breakfast. "Did you sleep well?" He laughed as Sabi jumped all over him, licking his face. Ty Lee took that as an answer and smiled. "Aang seems so strange today," Zuko commented to Ty Lee and Azula, just barely within Aang's earshot. He didn't mind them talking about him. "He seems like a regular kid." Ever since he met them, Aang knew parts of his personality sometimes unnerved them. He was 12 but acted much older than he appeared. He pretended not to listen as they watched him shower affection on Appa, who was groaning appreciatively from the attention. "It's a nice change," Ty Lee said. When Aang finally sat down next to the cooking fire to take his food, the smells of morning ginkgo tea filling his nostrils, Azula sprung a question on him. "So where are we going next?" Aang paused for a moment as he lifted his teacup to his mouth, then turned thoughtful. "Well, we should keep heading north," he said. "The Fire Nation really isn't that large, so we should reach the Golden City in just a few days." Ty Lee, who was in the middle of shoveling a portion of tofu pudding into her mouth, choked and her gray eyes became wide. "Ty Lee, are you all right?" Zuko asked her hurriedly, moving to help her. With one almighty gulp, Ty Lee swallowed her breakfast and took a deep breath. Yes, I'm fine, thanks, she said through her coughing. We're going to be there in just a few days. I think so, Zuko said, unraveling one of the maps he kept close at hand. Our detour through the outer islands slowed us down a bit, but we're back on track and in the mainland again, directly north of the old capital. This part of the mainland was dry and volcanic, the heart of the Fire Nation between Jiduan and the Golden City that had been claimed by the Water Tribes. They had made camp the night before on a flat piece of otherwise sloped ground, the shallow shell of a dormant volcano. Aang's expression returned to normal, his levity vanishing as his suspicion dragged him back down to earth. Why do you seem so nervous about going to the Golden City? He asked Ty Lee. Me? Nervous? What do you mean? She asked, twiddling her fingers together and shifting her eyes quickly from side to side. Let me see that map. She snatched the old piece of parchment from Zuko and quickly scanned it with her eyes and fingertip. Oh, look. Right there. That's what I wanted to show you guys before we got to the Golden City. What is it? Azula asked, her eyes narrowed. She was just as suspicious as Aang was, and they shared a glance with each other. He saw the apprehension in her eyes. The acrobat handed the map to her. Not too far away from here are the Water Gardens, Ty Lee explained. It's one of the most beautiful places in the Fire Nation. What is it? Zuko asked, a hint of distaste in his voice. It's a rainforest with a ton of rivers flowing through it, she responded. I've been there once, there's so much water around because of all the rivers intersecting with each other. The plant life makes the place look so magical, especially at night. There are so many glowy bugs, and the rainforest is full of the most beautiful flowers. And why would we want to go there? Aang asked with his arms crossed. Yes, that seems pointless, said Azula. It's one of the Fire Nation's most romantic locales, she said, elbowing Azula. I wanted to bring Zuko there. Zuko flushed. Well, I don't mind, he managed to say, his face burning. It could be worth seeing. But we'll have to wait around until nighttime. It's the best then, said Ty Lee. All right, I suppose, Azula said. It won't hurt to take a look, and it doesn't seem too far out of the way. What? Aang exclaimed, turning to her. A second ago you were on my side. Then it's decided. Ty Lee clapped her hands together. As the others began to pack up camp, Aang glanced at Ty Lee again, noticing her face fall. But when she noticed him staring at her, she beamed again. That time, though, her smile didn't look as convincing. There is no doubt about it now, said Sokka, poring over his maps with his lieutenant, Kinto. The Avatar is definitely heading to the Golden City to find a fire-bending teacher. He must have thought he could throw me off with his detour. Or he was lost. But this time he's going in that direction for sure. Doesn't he already have a firebender with him, sir? That girl? Kinto asked. Sokka's fingers automatically moved to the flame headpiece in his pocket, rubbing the delicate piece of jewelry. She's weak, Sokka said. I've observed her closely in battle. She also has to be searching for a master. Aside from the Avatar, the only member of their little team worth worrying about would be the other girl, and she doesn't even have any weapons. Kunna entered the galley with a tray of seal biscuits. Do not underestimate her, Prince Sokka. She already messed with your plans twice. I don't plan to, grandmother, he said coldly, refusing to stare into her direction. She's a formidable chi blocker. I've studied her too. He knew the basis of her fighting style. There were some among the water tribes who practiced a similar martial art. Her fighting style was rare, but not impenetrable. Kunna looked over Sokka's shoulder at his map and let out a hum of appreciation, but then she almost pushed him out of the way to get a closer look. She bent her wrinkled face close to the parchment, a grin growing on her face. We're near the Water Gardens. Can we please go see them? Her eyes twinkled as she turned back to her grandson. We've got to beat the Avatar to the Golden City, said Sokka. One of the Water Nation's strongholds are at the gardens. I don't want to risk running into Bato again. He pulled his machete from his sheath and twirled it in his fingers, then grasped it tightly and stared at his reflection in the blade. He's been in my way this whole time. But the water gardens are magical, said Kunna. At night, the spirits light up all of the water and the plants and the air. It draws many tourists, and there are plenty of places to waterbend, but best of all, there will be plenty of girls there that are your age, sighing romantically in their loneliness. I said no, Sokka said sternly. It is a good place to look, and from what we've learned of the Avatar's movements, he surely likes to visit these tourist spots. He didn't reply, he just rolled his eye and looked back down at the map. It was potentially in the Avatar's route from the outer islands. Bato's going to get the Avatar first if we don't go. Sokka tapped his foot. And then scratched his chin. And then crossed his arms and frowned and furrowed his brow. You'll get an extra helping of seal biscuits, she crooned. Sokka groaned and hung his head. Someone tell the captain to set a course for the water gardens, he said, finally. Below the galley, in the ship's dark cargo hold, a masked figure leaned forward into the light coming from the limber hole, listening to the conversation above. Appa's tail lapped against the clear blue water as he swam through the narrow river system with the passengers on his back. Sabi batted at gnats in the air. Ty Lee was hanging off of Appa's horn, lowering herself as far as she could into the water and staring at her reflection, her fingers trailing in the river. Zuko kept looking all around to take in all the sights around them, while Aang gave Ty Lee a suspicious stare and Azula seemed uninterested. Aang could see why the water gardens were well known. Although it was unpleasantly hot and his clothes and hair stuck to his skin, the water was refreshingly clear and blue, and giant plants lined the sides of the river, a thick barrier of vivid green. The rainforest had tall, leafy trees, some thin and some fat, but Aang saw mostly mangroves along the water. Many of them hung over the river and some branches reached almost all the way to the other side, draping a curtain of leaves that Aang parted with his staff for Appa. The river was calm, but it occasionally intersected with others that fed into it that were shallower and more rapid. Enormous, colorful flowers stood out from the greenery. He saw spotted blue orchids and carnivorous pitcher plants, pink water lilies and passion flowers, and many stranger ones with dozens of petals that he couldn't identify. One even looked like a fierce monkey's face. He could have sworn it had made a noise at one point, but that could have been the hog monkeys howling somewhere in the distance. Even though little of his attention was on his surroundings, being in an area where life was hitting him with all of its intensity was truly amazing. He was used to war-torn lands, fire, and destruction. And it was a rarity in this world, too. According to Zuko and Azula, as well as Haru back in the Earth Kingdom military outpost outside Jiduan, much of the Earth Kingdom had become a dry, dead wasteland or a sprawling desert. Does anyone want to go swimming? Ty Lee suddenly asked, turning her head to them. The water is so clear and cool. Zuko gave the water a look of distaste. I don't know, back home, the deepest rivers in the jungle had all kinds of flesh-eating fish or venomous eel snakes. Appa probably has nothing to worry about, though. Ty Lee promptly pulled her fingers out of the water. Oh, well. Heh. Just a suggestion. As Aang directed his stare to the pristine water, he seemed to feel the coolness calling to him. If only he could waterbend again. He thought momentarily about going for a swim, despite Zuko's warning. It would be fun. Sokka. Azula leapt up out of her seat, staring avidly down the river. Aang's gaze shot to that direction, spotting a ship turn a bend to head right toward them. How do you know it's him? Zuko asked, jumping to Appa's head to grab the reins. All the times we've faced him, you don't recognize his ship yet. Azula rolled her eyes, turning to Aang. Are we running or fighting? There's really no point to fighting him when we can just fly away. Aang mused, leaning over the saddle to stare deeper into the water. Oh, said Ty Lee, staring in the totally opposite direction. As Aang watched, the river seemed to be halting its flow, even moving in the other direction. He looked up as a shadow passed over the bison and they drifted underneath a canopy of vines and flowers. Sabi squeaked with fear. 3 skiffs sailed towards them, coming from one of the many rivers that forked into the main one behind them. Several waterbenders stood on each, moving as one to gather a large wave to topple the Avatar's bison. Fly! Aang shouted. I'm on it. Zuko returned, snapping the reins. Appa, yip yip. The bison needed no further encouragement. sensing the fear and danger that quickly approached them. With a mighty flap of its tail, which splashed water everywhere, the bison leapt into the sky and Aang blasted the canopy of vines out of the way. Ty Lee sat back into the saddle with a sigh of relief. Oh man, that was a close one. Were those Bato's men? Azula wondered aloud. What were they doing here? Sokka and Bato would never work together. She trailed off as her question was answered. From the sky, they could all see the Water Tribe encampment in the center of a deforested section of the Water Gardens. Trees had been dried out and withered. Sleek, narrow ships docked along the river's banks, many of the largest rivers seemed to converge there. The flag of the Water Tribes was proudly displayed over the landscape. This was territory claimed by the enemy. Both Zuko and Azula gasped. Azula rounded on Ty Lee, who was silent with her shoulders hunched. You knew. Her tone came out accusatory and harsh. On the other side of the saddle, totally removed from what was going on around him, Aang stared over the side of Appa toward the ship below them. His gray, stormy eyes met Sokka's angry blue one. After contemplating his decision for a moment, he jumped. The wind ripped at his clothes and hair as he fell towards the ground and the water, his arms and legs sprawled out on all sides. His companions' panicked shouts were lost to him as he soared, feeling free of all troubles, captured wholly by the pure exhilaration of falling. Aang unfurled his glider and seemed to float the rest of the short distance, landing right in the middle of Sokka's deck in a crouch. He swept his staff out in a circle, knocking several of the warriors away with a blast of wind. Sokka was on his toes and quick to retaliate, gathering streams of water from the river below him and sending them at the Avatar, constant and unwavering. Aang dodged the spear of another offending warrior, swung his staff upwards once, and then brought up the other side and slammed the man into the deck with air-powered strikes. The force of the attacks knocked him unconscious, but Aang moved again before the warrior even hit the ground. He kicked off of the balustrade, swept the floor of warriors, rode the wind, and came crashing down again with astounding force. He ducked under a vicious boomerang attack and turned to his only remaining opponent. Sokka deftly caught the weapon as it returned obediently to him, staring the Avatar resolutely in the eye. Aang, to the prince's surprise, dropped his staff in a gesture of surrender. I don't want to fight you. We need to talk. You should listen to him, Prince Sokka, said the voice of an old woman, arriving on the slippery wet deck. Bato's ship slowly but surely approached, only an arrow's shot away. A hand of diplomacy is a welcome one. Maybe for you, Sokka shot at her. Leave me. This is our business. Aang nodded his head in acknowledgement of the old woman, glad that she didn't advise Sokka to attack. Perhaps she was a good influence on him. She nodded back to Aang, disregarding Sokka's order. What is it that you'd like to say? She asked. Sokka, I know that, somewhere, there is good in you. You are a naive fool. Bato interrupted them, his ship was now close enough to speak and be heard. Sokka didn't move, didn't even look at the other waterbender. Our most esteemed prince exiled himself out of an arrogant, selfish need to prove himself. He sought glory at the expense of his countrymen. Good. No, he never used to be good. He used to be great, the prodigal son. A genius in the making. But then he failed his manhood ceremony and now he's been whittled down to a simple boy who doesn't do anything except chase his latest obsessions like a child who can't decide on his favorite toy. Girls, inventions, food, the Avatar, which is it, Prince Sokka? Aang's eyes widened. He didn't know Sokka in this world. But maybe, underneath the scowls and the anger, the waterbending, the loss of one of his eyes, could parts of the Sokka he knew be buried? Was there a chance he could bring that Sokka back? He had to try. Bato's words, his description of Sokka, made him think the two versions of his friend had more in common than he thought. Though scathing, it told Aang something valuable. His heart swelled in elation. I would tell you to get away from here, Kun Na said, fists clenched. But since you formally defeated him in Sednae. Stop it, Sokka growled, his voice low and dangerous. Don't say another word. Nobody had a chance to. Suddenly, arrows, men, and weapons flew from the trees surrounding them, dirty brown and green and blue cloaked figures swinging by vines to land on either of the two ships. Bato's soldiers immediately responded to the attack, brandishing their weapons, but the assailants felled them quickly. The mysterious fighters swarmed the two ships with concentrated skill, helping Aang out of a situation he was disgruntled to see interrupted. One of the fighters, a boy scarcely older than Zuko or Sokka and wielding a ball of water, spoke to him. "Follow us," he said in a rush, hurling the concentrated sphere. "Your friends are safe." That was all the confirmation he needed. As soon as most of the soldiers were down, the attackers fled from the scene. Aang followed with equal speed, which was saying a lot. Theirs was astounding. Their carefully practiced feet stepped over any knot in the uneven ground, around any rogue branch, through the swampy ground. The sounds of battle were lost behind them as the cloaked men rushed back into the foliage. Aang was heavily reminded of the swamp benders back in his own world. Was this the new representation of them here? Why were they in the Fire Nation? Suddenly, without warning, the group was thrown into a clearing. Aang, who met no more resistance from the rainforest, almost stumbled and fell. He caught himself just in time and looked around. He spotted Appa first, with Zuko, Azula, and Ty Lee still sitting upon him, looking tense and wary. His eyes passed over them quickly, wanting to get a feel of the terrain around him just in case they needed a quick escape. It was just a small clearing with a fierce river cutting right through the middle and dense forest on all sides. A meager camp had been set up all around them, filled with waterbenders in brown cloaks and tents made for quick construction and collapse. "What is this place?" Aang asked the waterbender who rescued him. "Who are you guys?" "We're all deserters from the Water Nation Navy," the young man said proudly. "Of course, we're not the first. Our leader, Master Pakku, is. He's a great man and a powerful waterbender." A jolt of excitement burned through his veins, and Aang smiled. Another old friend, and this time, he was on Aang's side. "My name's Sangok," the young man continued. "I'm the second person to desert the Water Navy and survive, and the youngest, by far. I think I should get some notoriety for that." "My name's Aang," he said. "Can I meet Master Pakku?" "Of course. We already know you're the Avatar. Did you come here to master waterbending?" "I would be honored," Aang said hurriedly. He had great respect for the man. He, too, died during the war for Aang. It would be nice to see Pakku again. "I'll go get him," the excited youth said. Aang watched him run off to one of the tents and he walked over to his friends. "Guys, we're safe here. You can come down now," he said. "Aang, they're waterbenders," Azula said, which she thought explained everything. "I know, but they're on our side," he replied. "How'd you guys get here?" "We were going back to help you after you made your stupid move, but they caught us and told us to come here," Azula said sharply, emphasizing the word stupid. "We just found out they were waterbenders." "Yes, which is why they're going to teach me," he said with a grin. Zuko almost fell over with shock, but Ty Lee looked relieved. "Won't that take a lot of time?" Ty Lee asked. She seemed almost hopeful. As Aang gave her a calculating glare, two men emerged from a tent. One was Sangok with an expectant grin. The other was an old man with a sour expression. The top of his head was bald and scarred, but the hair that he had was white. He wore faded blue skins and walked with the experience that came with age. Pakku was almost exactly as Aang remembered him. "You are a strange boy, Avatar Aang," said the old waterbender, who looked at him with a scrutinizing eye. "You are a child and you claim you don't know how to bend the other three elements, yet you walk as if you were a fully realized Avatar, one with the weight of the world on his shoulders. Your eyes have seen pain and destruction. You have lost people who were important to you. I do not believe that you have not mastered waterbending. You are as perceptive as ever, Master Pakku," Aang thought to himself, trying not to smile. "And you are skeptical. I'm glad you haven't lost that." "Oh, but I have," Aang responded with the same tone, to the surprise of his friends. "I have mastered waterbending 1,000 times over. I have lived 1,000 lives worth of pain and loss. Yet I'm doing it again, and again, and again. That is the way of the Avatar, Master Pakku. Now there is not a doubt in my mind, you even speak with the deflective tones of a master waterbender. Despite that fact, I will teach you as you wish. Aang's facade was lost as surprise flooded into his expression. What? That's it? You aren't even going to lecture me about mastering the elements in the wrong order. I should, shouldn't I? He wondered aloud, stroking his beard. Why bother? You must already know this. Besides, Avatar Kuruk visited me in a dream very recently, and told me of your situation. It is imperative that you master waterbending, for the 1001st time. Thousands of years of tradition thrown out the window, just like that. I wonder if the order that the Avatar is supposed to master the elements matters at all, in the grand scheme of things. Aang's eyebrows went into his hair and his mouth hung open. Was Pakku insinuating that he knew about the arrival of Seiriu's moon, or that he knew Aang was from a different world? Pakku was staring at him knowingly. Aang nodded to the old man. That's all well and good, but if you're running from the Navy, why are you hiding in their territory? Azula interjected. It seems stupid to me. Pakku smirked. Because they would never think to search for us here. We are located next to the roughest river in all of the Water Gardens, treacherous for any of their ships, nobody ever follows it. Decoys led the officers pursuing you to an area outside of the Water Gardens. We are perfectly safe, for now. This place has been under control of the Water Navy for almost 5 years. He gestured for Sangok to go away. The young man nodded and left. We move frequently enough, but we've been in the Water Gardens for the last month or so. That was exactly what Azula wanted to know. She rounded on Ty Lee. You must have known this place was under control of the enemy. She hissed. You've been here before. You brought us into danger, knowing full well what would happen. That's right, Aang said, having forgotten about Ty Lee. You have been hiding something from us. Before, I respected your privacy. Now, since your secret is endangering us, I'd prefer that you tell us. He suppressed the small part of him that wanted to shout out his own secrets, fully aware of his hypocrisy. But his secrets weren't a danger to anyone. Ty Lee looked so small and afraid, staring at her feet and holding her braid close. Her lip quivered and her eyes looked wet. I can't tell you. Aang didn't look at her eyes as he spoke, a weight in his chest that felt heavier when he remembered how she stood by him when Zuko and Azula almost left him for Zhao. Then you can't stay with us. No. She shouted, leaning forward to hold his gaze. Don't make me leave. You guys are my friends. You have to trust me on this. What reason do we have to trust you? Zuko finally spoke, his head turned toward the river. Ty Lee looked as if she had been slapped in the face. Pakku stared at Ty Lee with his usual scrutiny before he yawned. Are we going to start your training or what? He interrupted the knot of friends. I apologize, Master Pakku. Ty Lee's been with us for a while, but she is hiding things, Aang explained. And I know exactly what she's hiding, the old man responded. All 4 faces looked up at him in shock. Ty Lee's was the greatest. But that is her secret to keep. It is not a terrible burden, I'll tell you that much. And then he crossed his arms and Aang knew him well enough that he'd stubbornly refuse to say anything else. Look. Ty Lee started. I promise, that I'll tell you once we get to the Golden City. Okay. Aang, knowing that was as far as they would get with her, nodded reluctantly. Fine, you can stay. But as long as your secret doesn't endanger us again. Ty Lee nodded, letting out a deep breath of relief even as Zuko turned away from her with his shoulders slackened and Azula glared at her back. Luckily, when learning waterbending, Aang did not have to suffer through any tedious breathing exercises or strict discipline. Pakku simply taught of the movement and grace and cutting ability of waterbenders, the power to adapt, redirect, and balance. Waterbending was the element of change. The master waterbender began the same way Katara did, all those years ago. They first tried the simplest of all waterbending moves, shifting the water up and down the riverbank, like ocean surf washing up on a beach. It was on a much smaller scale, and Aang grasped it well the first time around, but something happened this time that surprised him. He exhaled, and the coldness in his heart seemed to manifest itself as the water froze solid beneath him, anchoring his own feet into the ground. However, as they progressed further, something didn't quite feel right. He still felt rigid and hesitant with his movements, and whenever a bending form reminded him of Katara he felt his grasp of the water quiver and splash at his feet. He had hoped that whatever happened when he initially learned fire bending in this world would happen again, that an empty bowl would fill with his memories of water. Nonetheless, Aang smiled. Ice was enough for now. He was a waterbender again. Pakku and his men did not plan to move from the middle of the lion turtle's den anytime soon. They hadn't been discovered yet, they reasoned, and they seemed reasonably confident that they could make an escape quickly enough to avoid danger if necessary. As a result, Team Avatar made the same decision to stay. At around noon the next day, Pakku decided to leave Aang and the others alone along the riverbank that ran through the camp. Zuko and Ty Lee relaxed together on the lip of a rock that jutted out above the river while Aang and Azula practicing their fire bending. He was forbidden to try waterbending without Pakku around, which caused Aang's firebending to be more aggressive and angry than normal. He hated being treated like a child. "You're not concentrating," Azula snapped at him after a few minutes. "You nearly burned me." "I want to waterbend," he said frankly. His gray eyes peered at the rough river, deep and foreboding. A single rock poked out of the foam near the center. Azula rolled her eyes. "Don't tell me you're thinking about going there. You can waterbend perfectly fine from over here." "Not for what I have in mind," he said with a very Azula-like smirk. He took a few steps backward, carefully calculated the distance to the tiny rock, and jumped. The air currents easily brought him over the distance safely, but when he landed his feet almost slipped. He turned back to Azula once he stabilized himself and gave her a triumphant grin. She rolled her eyes again. Occasionally, water lapped up over the surface of the rock and threatened to pull him along with the river. He quickly remedied this by freezing his feet to the rock. Satisfied and facing against the flow of the river, he held out his hand to divert the flow. Instead of wielding it himself, it was easier for him to slightly nudge the river's path. Next, he tried to lift a short, circular wall of water that surrounded him on all sides, but it quivered and looked shapeless before falling back into the water. He lowered his hands and let the water fall around him as he prepared another move in his mind, trying to picture Katara doing it in his place. Getting more and more frustrated at his lack of progress, he slapped the water with his hands. Ty Lee waved at him from the lip of rock she was seated on, and she shouted something, but he couldn't hear her over the roar of the river. Just as he was about to try something else, he heard a shout from much closer. Ty Lee ran toward the riverbank, looking panicked and pointing frantically, and it took him seconds too long to notice what had happened. Behind him, Azula's form had been ripped downriver and she did all she could to keep her head above the water. Aang yelled out to her and tried to jump after her, but his frozen feet anchored him in place and he almost fell into the river himself. He wrenched his feet free and was prepared to follow her before she was lost, but he didn't have his glider. His breaths came hard and fast as he thought of the best way to go rescue her. Despite the fact that he would never make it in time, he jumped across the river back to shore to find his glider and follow her through the air, but was distracted by Master Pakku swooping into the river and surfing down it on a board of ice faster than he could follow. As Aang landed on solid ground, Zuko and Ty Lee rushed over to him. "Why weren't you paying attention?" Zuko demanded of the boy. "Your waterbending pulled my sister into the river." "Stop shouting, I'm sure it was an accident." Ty Lee tried to intervene. "She could be drowning." Zuko roared, and he seemed ready to jump into the river himself. "Zuko, she's going to be fine." Aang yelled over him. He had no idea how that happened, his waterbending wasn't strong enough for that, there was no way he could have done that. Especially once he remembered a distant, similar shame regarding Katara. He never would have let something like that happen a second time. "Pakku's going after her, she's safe now." Zuko ran along the riverbank regardless, pushing past Aang. "She's all I have left." Hidden among the forest undergrowth, Bato smirked as he watched the group of close-knit friends clash. This could be advantageous, he thought aloud. He was the one who had thrust his hand out and swallowed the girl in the river. It had been so easy. The Avatar's pitiful waterbending display was the perfect culprit for splitting up his merry band. He knew they were strong together, but they could be broken. And it would be just as easy as finding them in the first place. His old master's attempt at deceit came as no surprise. And above him, on the branch of a tree, the blue spirit stared. Paco caught up to her quickly, seeing the girl's raven black hair among the white foam of the river. Before he even reached her, he lifted one of his hands and thrust the water up from under her, throwing her onto solid ground. He skidded across the ice and landed next to her as she sputtered on her knees. "That boy is a fool," Paco said immediately, not even asking if she was all right. Just as he showed no compassion, she offered no gratitude. "Tell me about it," Angela coughed. She brought her hands up to both sides of her mouth and expelled small bits of fire, both to warm her up and clear her lungs. It sounded much like a violent cough. Paco regarded her, examining her features while she distracted herself with her coughing. Something about her seemed familiar. Or maybe he just spent too long in the Fire Nation. Without knowing why, he found himself speaking. "I always wanted to be a firebender." She looked up at him, eyeing him with a curious, penetrating stare. That look made him wonder again if they had somehow met before. She uttered one word. "Why?" "Water and ice are cold. As you just witnessed, it can be fierce and dangerous. Fire burns with warmth and life." Angela snorted and stood. "Fire is life itself," she said. "It breathes and grows and eats just like a living being, to the point of being out of control, sometimes. I always thought fire was the most dangerous. But I love it for that." She laughed in a way that seemed almost derisive. "And Aang told me you were wise." Normally, Paco would have scolded her for being so disrespectful. When he was younger, he might have scolded her for speaking out of line. But instead, he said nothing. Aang kicked a loose stone on the ground as he trooped off from the camp and away from the others. Zuko was still angry. Instead of going off into the rainforest, he had taken to pacing back and forth by the riverbank. Angela and Paco weren't back yet, but it had only been a few minutes. And Ty Lee was keeping Zuko company. As Aang walked, he had only one thing on his mind. Sokka didn't hold grudges as long as Zuko. And it made him miss his old friends even more. "What's wrong, Avatar?" Aang's head snapped to the voice, easily recognizing the derisive tone as Bato's. Before he could move, vines snaked up his hands and feet, binding him in place. "What do you want, Bato?" He wore a snarl, but he wasn't fazed by the man who was hiding in the trees. He did not make an effort to escape, but the vines crawled further around his body, completely constricting him. Then he became unbalanced and fell. This was all he could do? "Just some conversation," the waterbender replied from the dense foliage. "Now if you'd come with me." The man began to use his waterbending to drag Aang across the ground, pulling him in the direction of the river. If he thought he could drown Aang easily, he was in for a surprise. If it was an ambush, he could escape. He was not concerned. "Why are you separated from your friends?" "Well, I wanted some time alone, but I was rudely interrupted," Aang replied without batting an eye. "Your friends no longer trust you, do they?" Bato dragged him to the open riverside and Aang was suddenly blinded by the bright sunlight, but his eyes adjusted quickly. He felt the heat on his face, and after a few deep breaths he felt the vines around his wrists grow hotter. "What makes you think that?" Aang asked him face to face, now that he was visible. Bato folded his hands behind his back and now Aang could see that he smirked. "There is no peace among your little group. You all have your secrets." "What do you know?" Aang asked him, anger seeping into his voice. "You've been spying, haven't you?" "That may be so. But why don't you leave them? They don't want you nor need you. They don't care. Why train with the disgraced Master Paco when I could train you instead? I'm a better warrior and waterbender than he is." "Wait, you really want me to join you or something like that?" "Sorry, but I'm not about to fall for something so stupid, Bato." "That's Chief Bato, you little brat." The waterbender's eyes narrowed to slits. "So. I see that is your decision. Loyal to your friends like a good little avatar, aren't you?" Bato took a step back and clenched his hand, causing the vines around Aang to tighten. "You have no choice. You're my prisoner now." "You wish," Aang replied, straining against the force of the vines. He breathed in and out, centering the heat of the sun on his hands and torso. Concentrating, he threw his hands from his constraints in a burst of fire which burnt the vines to crisps. He took a fire-bending stance, but went on the attack quickly, hurling a fireball at the older man. "Fighting head-on just isn't my style," said Bato, drawing water from the river into a shield, absorbing the attack. He returned it back to Aang and jumped towards the water, walking across it like a water-bending master. Before Aang could unleash another fireball from his fingertips, Bato raised both of his hands and water washed all around them both, coiling around the two and shielding Bato from Aang's view. Then, it froze. "Welcome to my domain, Avatar. Lesson 1, Ice can be molded into whatever shape you wish, as long as your imagination allows it." Aang looked straight up at the only opening in the ice and jumped toward it, but it sealed together and froze quickly. Aang smirked and waved his hand over it, unfreezing the ice himself. The water splashed onto him, but he jumped out of the ice prison and looked around him. Bato had constructed a large dome of ice with few holes interspersed throughout the surface, designating small tunnels underneath. Well, if he wanted to play that game, then let's play, Aang said quietly to himself, a grin growing on his face. He loved games. He dove headfirst into one of the holes. It was a narrow fit, but using a combination of both his fire bending and his very limited water bending, he was able to melt most of the ice around him and continue whenever there was a block in the tunnel. Very rarely were they large enough for him to stand. Sharp-toothed fish glared at him from in the ice as if it was his fault they had been immobilized like this. Under here, Bato had frozen a whole forest of round, leafy plants, and at one point when unfreezing part of it one of the eel snakes Zuko had mentioned earlier almost fell on Aang's head. Finally, he reached solid ground, the river bottom, and was able to stand up straight. There was no sign of Bato. And then an ice spike shot from the wall, nearly impaling his shoulder. He narrowly dodged, but both sides of the tunnel closed, imprisoning him. He used what little airbending he could in the tight space to jump near the ceiling, where he dug his hand into the ice to hold himself. Next, he blasted the ceiling away with a concentrated burst of fire, where he emerged into open air once again. Immediately, he noticed that the dome was constructed of many walls. The ceiling ice was taken away to form even more of a maze. As such, he was able to see Bato through some of the spires of ice. The chief moved quickly through the walls he had made, sealing them back up again and sending concentrated water blasts or spikes of ice at the airbender. Aang dodged each of them or countered with as much fire as he could muster, but Bato quickly stopped his movement by melting the ice he was standing on instantly and freezing his legs inside up to his thighs. Aang struggled to move, condensing heat on his feet while he simultaneously sent small fireballs at Bato or generated winds with his hands. The ice around him melted further and the water dragged the Avatar in until he was completely submerged. The surface of the water froze, sealing off his only escape and trapping him in a globe of water and ice. Aang held his breath, as it was the only thing he could do. He couldn't even see through the murk kicked up from the riverbed, past the plants and weeds. A jolt of fear when he saw a movement that made him think of one of the flesh-eating fish almost made him gasp in a panic. He wanted to curse Bato and his deceptive style of fighting. It was something he definitely wasn't used to. Even Fire Lord Azula was more direct when she fought. The ice cutting off his escape froze and thickened further, rapidly limiting what little space he had. Instead of trying to shout at Bato, he concentrated on his chances of survival, which were getting slimmer. Airbending was useless underwater. Earthbending wasn't an option. Firebending? The ice was too thick to melt, and without his breath his options were limited. And his own meager waterbending would never work against Bato's superior power. If only he had a sword. He remembered Sokka's weapon cutting through steel. That would have been useful here. Unfortunately, he had never picked up a sword in either of his lives. Aang was beginning to feel lightheaded. His chest began to pump. His eyelids became heavier. His space became smaller and smaller. Unable to hold it in anymore, he opened his mouth as if to scream. And suddenly, he was thrust up and out of the water, meeting warm air once again. He gulped in huge breaths, but forgot about the water in his system and began to hack it out. When he was able, he managed to look up to see the brown cloaked form of Pakku. But Pakku wasn't looking at Aang. Aang looked behind him, following Pakku's gaze, noticing for the first time the place where two rivers came into one. They were feeding into the main, large, vicious river where Pakku's camp had been secretly nestled. And two water tribe riverboats followed the flow of the river. Aang spotted Sokka at the helm of one. The other ship must have belonged to Bato. Aang stood on shaky legs, keeping his balance on the ice as Bato smirked. Bato had only been distracting him. "Step back and go with your friends," Pakku said to Aang, his voice stern. "They are safe behind us." "But what about you?" Aang asked. "I'll deal with the warriors," the old man said with a characteristic smirk. The ice prison all around them melted except for the small platform they were on, which simply lowered to ground level. Pakku raised his arms and summoned all of the melted water which rose into a great orb around the two and blasted it toward the two ships. The boats were instantly swept up by the torrent, but at least a dozen warriors, plus Sokka and his aged companion, jumped from each. With water constantly feeding his arsenal, Pakku rode upon tall, spinning water snakes and blasted water at the dozens of warriors below him, wiping several out with each wave. Pakku's arms moved with the grace only a full master could acquire, bending his wrists and washing the warriors repeatedly, switching between the states of water at a whim. Finally, he froze down most of Sokka and Bato's men in an expansive snowfield or prisons of ice. Aang spent no time being awed by the display of power, but Zuko, Azula, and Ty Lee did. He snapped them out of their trances by calling to them. "Azula, help me take care of Bato and Sokka," he yelled to the firebender. She tore her eyes away from the spectacle and nodded, her face set in an expression that told Aang she was ready to make things burn. He wanted to apologize to her, but that would wait. Seconds later, their two targets arrived as if expecting this fight to happen. Or perhaps they were racing to get Aang. He didn't care, either way. This time, Aang took his refined airbending stance while Azula readied her own. Quickly calculating the strength of his opponents with his eyes, Aang decided how this battle would turn out. To win, he would have to fight Bato and leave Sokka up to Azula. Aang built up inertia with a quick circular motion and unleashed the winds on Bato, sending the man flying away from Sokka. Aang followed relentlessly, flicking his wrists to send blasts of air at Bato, but he rolled to the side to avoid it, kicking out his feet. Meanwhile, Sokka attacked Azula first, as if to get her out of the way so he could claim his prize. She blocked the water attack with a hastily constructed wall of fire, circling around Sokka and shooting a fireball from her fingertips in a counter-attack. Her thick, black hair whipped at her face, nearly blocking her view. Sokka absorbed the attack and retaliated with a concentrated sphere of water, which she dodged by rolling to the side. "You fight like an airbender," Sokka said, his eye narrowing. "You clearly don't know your own art. Just mimicking the Avatar in the absence of an actual master. Shut up." She shot back, lunging forward with the force of her own punch. A wave of fire launched from her fists, but he used the water on the ground around him to construct a wall that deflected it. He then condensed that wall into ice and shot the spikes at her. She ducked, lacking the power to stop the attack. Since her method wasn't working, she decided to try and distract him with words. "I'm getting my headpiece back today," she growled at him, bent low. She was ready to move at a moment's notice. "I'd like to see you try," he responded to the challenge. He pulled the flamed headpiece out of his pocket and stuck it into his warrior's wolf tail, openly mocking her. "There. Try and take it." Azula jumped up into a kick and sent an arc of burning fire his way, but he ran to the side and used puddles from the ground to launch discs of water at her. Azula took a move from Ty Lee's book and cartwheeled out of the way of each one. She smirked. "You can't hit me," she taunted. She shot small daggers of fire at him next and charged forward right behind them, gathering more fire at the tips of her fingers. As Sokka concentrated on blocking the small projectiles, she pulled the fire up and seemed to slash at him, leaving a tail of fire like a whip in its wake. Sokka barely managed to block the attack, but she reached her hand up and wrapped her fingers around the pronged headpiece. But she had left her midsection open. Sokka blasted her in the gut with a ball of water, hurling her several feet away. She landed on the ground, gasping in pain. Sokka smirked in victory and was about to go over to defeat Aang, but he felt a lack of weight on his head. His face turned to one of shock. The flame crown was gone. From the ground, despite being beaten, Azula smirked. She held her prized possession in her hands once again. "You got lucky," he hissed. "Doesn't matter. That's a small loss. Keep it." Azula, totally spent, couldn't find the energy to stop him as he went toward Aang. "How the heck did I get matched up with the old lady?" Ty Lee asked, in a loose combat stance as they faced each other on the mud. Mangrove roots made a tangled wall on Ty Lee's right side and a few fish flopped around their feet. She tried not to think of any eel snakes slithering through the mud. Kunna held her hands behind her back, tilted her head, and smiled. "You must never underestimate old ladies," Kunna responded, giving the girl a smile that reached her eyes. "I know plenty of powerful ones. Though even that old man over there is something of an old friend. If you wouldn't underestimate him, you shouldn't underestimate me, either." "Okay, stand there like a nice old lady," Ty Lee said, slowly approaching her. She seemed to ignore every word Kunna said. "You're a cute little thing, you know that? Anyways, this won't hurt. Just stand still. I gotta stop your bending, just in case." "Oh?" Kunna asked, interested. Ty Lee raised her hand to strike the woman's shoulder, but was stopped abruptly when Kunna flicked her hand forward, gathering all the water and frost on the ground and locking her in a great pillar of ice. "What? Hey." Ty Lee tried to struggle, her arms and legs sprawled. She couldn't move. "Darn you, old ladies!" she cried to the sky. Kunna just laughed into her hand. Pakku surfed downstream, escaping the notice of the Avatar and his friends as he fled back to his camp. His followers, not knowing of the battle, would be waiting. Now that they had been found, they had to leave. He had confidence in the Avatar's abilities, they would escape from Chief Bato and Prince Sokka without too much issue. Besides, it wasn't right to disrupt the balance and teach the Avatar waterbending before fire or earth, no matter what a vision claimed. A black-clad figure jumped from the trees to his left, gliding through the air on columns of water that froze into a solid wall of ice that split the river completely. This happened so fast that Pakku nearly collided with the wall. The figure skidded across the top with apparent ease. As soon as the unknown waterbender stopped, balancing precariously atop the wall, Pakku observed her figure and blue Oni mask. Aside from the mask, she was dressed completely in black. Any hair that she might have had was concealed inside of her hood, and her hand was loosely grasping a sheathed sword on her back. Standing on the surface of the water, Pakku spoke to her. "And who might you be?" he asked, as if someone had simply approached him on the road. The figure lifted her fingers to the chin of her mask, pulling away the hood and lifting the mask at the same time. Tanned skin, mahogany hair, and blue eyes met him at once. Her hair was pulled back by a clasp, and her eyes settled in a fierce gaze. "Hello, Elder," she said. "Or should I just call you Pakku? It is good to see you again, Katara. No need to be so formal. I was almost your master at one time, wasn't I?" "Almost." The princess of the Water Nation stared at him coldly. "Where do you think you're going? Still have a grudge about that, do you? You already had 2 other teachers at the time. I didn't see a need to add any more ingredients to the soup." She tightened her grip around the sword at her back. "Answer the question." "You know me. I flow wherever the water decides to take me," he replied with a grin. "I can't let you do that." The young woman tied her demon mask to her hood and let it rest on her back. "You are a wanted criminal, after all. Where is the old Katara?" "I didn't teach you to be as cold and impolite as the ice you wield," he responded. "Oh, wait. I didn't. If it is a fight you want, you'll get it." Before he could even gather water beneath him, Katara sprung from her perch, twisting in the air and lifting water far beneath her to fly at the old man. He rose above the attack on a water snake, unleashing razor blades of water on her. They didn't faze her. She slid to a stop on the muddy riverbed, using her hands to steady herself as well as call up a flood of water which he blocked, but she circled it around and struck him again with it. The princess called up great amounts of water with all of her attacks, which she used to crush her foes under the sheer amount of weight. But she could be quick and precise when she desired, as he well knew. She unsheathed the short blade from her back and swung it at Pakku, gathering water along the blade's length which sharpened like an elongation of her sword. When the attack missed, she held her sword and let the stream of water hang from it like a whip, which she used to lash at him from a distance. Pakku was not about to let her dominate the fight. He whipped up a wall of water and flung it at her, turning it into ice spikes while it was in the air. She simply raised her other hand and stopped them in midair, reversing the points and sending them right back at her master. She stood rigid, her mouth in a grim line, her eyes solid and steady. She broke this pattern as Pakku neared, spinning rapidly with her arms extended on a slant, and calling up ice spikes from the moisture in the ground. She spun 3 quick times, summoning ice with each one. Water snaked up her arms, coiling into whips which extended towards the other water-bending master. The roar of an animal above her seemed to distract Katara long enough to look at it. Her eyes followed the Avatar's bison, most likely going to where the Avatar fought her brother and Bato. When she looked back at her opponent, he made sure to disappear into the trees. What a turn of events, he thought as he retreated. To meet both Bato and Katara again in a single day. And there had been a certain someone on Sokka's ship, one he didn't dare hope to see again. But it couldn't have been her. Katara reached for the mask on her back and pulled it back on, hiding her identity once again. Aang returned the 2 consecutive water jets with a rain of fire, expanding it and letting it grow with a soft breeze. Sokka and Bato both covered their faces and immediately went on to the attack again. They were both fighting viciously, as if competing against each other to see who could defeat the Avatar first. Well, Aang wouldn't let either of them win. He jumped up onto one of the tree branches surrounding him and took a look over the site of battle. Bato and Sokka's warriors were still frozen to the ground. Azula and Zuko continued trying to chip Ty Lee out of a pillar of ice. Pakku was nowhere to be seen. This battle had ended. Before either of his opponents could attack him, he pulled out his bison whistle and blew. It did not faze the two, in fact, they seemed to be moving faster. Aang put on a burst of speed and shot from the tree, running across the barren river, its flow of water still blocked, with speed only an airbender possessed. He reached Zuko, Azula, and Ty Lee on the other side before Sokka and Bato made it to the mud. Zuko handed Aang his glider staff. "We're done here. Appa's coming," he said. He melted the rest of the ice with a wave of his hand and freed Ty Lee, much to her gratitude. Aang noticed the fire crown prominently displayed on Azula's head, but he didn't get a chance to say anything as Bato and Sokka neared, both gathering water in their hands. Aang jumped forward and swung his staff with all his might, striking Bato with a powerful blast of wind. Sokka managed to throw himself to the ground just in time, but as he moved to get up, another blast of wind flattened him, courtesy of Appa. Aang kept an eye on Sokka as Appa landed on the ground and the other 3 boarded. The prince's head was face down in the mud, but as Aang watched, he lifted his face to him slowly. Then, without warning, Sokka shot his hand out and pulled an ice spike from the mud under Aang, but with his quick reflexes, Aang was able to avoid it and jump into Appa's saddle. The bison flew away, leaving this mess of a visit behind them. Aang looked regretfully down at his old friend, but knew he couldn't do anything now. He vowed to himself to help Sokka later, somehow. However he could. Sabi curled around Ty Lee once she sat in the saddle, who looked miserable and angry at the same time. "Well, that was eventful," Aang said to them. "I'll say," said Ty Lee. "I got beaten up by an old lady." "An old lady?" "I won my fight," Azula said proudly, gesturing to her newly returned headpiece. Even covered in mud, it did little to damper her victorious smirk. Ty Lee awed it. "And we did get to see quite a bit, you were right, Ty Lee. These gardens were beautiful at night." "What happened to Pakku?" "He'll be okay," said Aang. "He needed to do other things, I'm sure. Try as he might, it was not his time to learn waterbending yet." Zuko crossed his arms from Appa's head. They were able to hear the anger in his voice. "At least you guys got to fight someone. I had to do all the cleanup work." "It's okay, Zuzu. I'm sure there will be plenty of other water tribe heads to knock," said his sister, smirking. "I feel useless," the older boy said in a low tone. "I don't even have the excuse of not being able to bend." "Ty Lee can't, and she's amazing at fighting," Zuko went on. Ty Lee lowered her head. "We're sorry," she said to him. "Don't be," he replied, albeit a little harshly. As Sabi switched over to Aang's shoulder and nibbled on some of their food, Aang looked over to the horizon ahead of them as Zuko brooded. Try as he might to feel sorry for his friend, his mind was elsewhere. That whole time, he couldn't stop wondering where Katara could be in this world. She should have been here to teach him waterbending instead. His gaze focused to the back of Ty Lee's head, her braid whipping the air behind her. She seemed to be staring reluctantly to the north, toward the direction of the Golden City. What will await us there, I wonder? Chapter 16, The Tournament. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. He couldn't bend. And he was so cold. Unable to take it any longer, he opened his mouth and reflexively took a deep breath, sucking in whole mouthfuls of water. He was going to die. Once out of his dream, the boy shot up and took a deep breath, sucking in mouthfuls of air. As soon as he realized he could breathe, he calmed himself. Aang fell back into his pillow on the ground, thinking about how helpless he was when Bato imprisoned him in a cube of ice, filled completely with water. The man had tried to drown him. The whole time he was in this world, he has never come closer to dying. His airbending was useless underwater. His firebending wasn't hot enough. His limited waterbending wasn't good enough to break Bato's hold. And earthbending wasn't even available to him. Only a solid, material object could have broken, ripped, through that thick ice. Aang didn't want to admit it to himself then, but he was scared. Even in his home world, his own bending never failed him. The night was dark and quiet. The only thing Aang heard was the wind shaking the trees and the steady crackle of their fire. Deep in thought, contemplating his weaknesses, Aang fell back into an uneasy sleep. His dreams were filled with numerous moments of Sokka, the Sokka he knew, his best friend, wielding his meteorite sword like a master, cutting through metal with ease. On the other side of the camp, Zuko's eyes were wide open as he was turned away from the fire. He heard Aang's deep breaths as he awoke, one of the telltale signs of Aang having a nightmare, but he did not do anything to indicate to the younger boy that he was awake. Zuko's eyes were fixed on his sheathed swords laying an arm's length away from him. Little did Aang or Zuko know, their contemplations were the same, but Zuko's were noticeably darker. He was incompetent with his blades. He was weaker than the rest of them, unable to do anything to help his friends in a fight. Aang, Azula, and Ty Lee all had skills to call their own. He could not fight on par with Sokka or Bato, constantly being removed from the fights. He was always forced to watch from the side as Aang or Azula were bending. His sister didn't even have a formal master and her skills were growing at a prodigious rate. And he couldn't even use his lack of bending as an excuse. Ty Lee was one of the strongest fighters he knew. The light training he received from Mai, the Shuriken Jutsu master, did little to help. She also wasn't a bender, yet she threw her knives with deadly precision. He still had all of her knives, darts, and needles, and he was even able to buy some of his own. She was another example of a non-bender who still managed to fight well. Zuko pounded his fist into the hard ground. He was angry. He was jealous. "This is it, our last town before the Golden City," Zuko announced moodily to the others as they came to the crest of a hill overlooking a mid-sized town. "It's kind of sad, isn't it?" Azula contemplated for a moment, which quickly passed. "Oh well. I'm just that much closer to mastering firebending." Ty Lee chuckled nervously, hunching her figure and slinging a bag over her shoulder. Yeah. Unlike most of the other Fire Nation towns, this one was relatively well kept. Being so close to the Golden City, it was well protected from the Water Navy. The town had neat, stone roads and orderly houses, a school, and even a small temple. Overlooking the town, however, was a gigantic castle of stone. To the north, across the sea, a great island was visible. On that island, amidst a volcanic range, lied the Golden City. Aang gripped his staff, Sabashi the lemur coiled around it, as he looked down on the town like an omnipresent being. "We'll get supplies and we're leaving. I plan to reach the Golden City by tomorrow afternoon." Aang gave a parting glance to Appa, who was grazing in the fields, as they left. "So who do you think lives in that castle?" Azula asked as they walked through the grass, scanning the imperious building. Think it could be royalty? Nah, said Ty Lee. The closest royalty lives in the Golden City. It's most likely just a feudal lord or something. A feudal lord? Zuko asked quizzically. Yeah, a wealthy landowner. He's probably rich enough to get authoritative power in the town. Or, more likely, the town was built around his estate, Ty Lee replied informatively. However, since this is under the Golden City's protection, he still bows down to their royalty. You seem to know a lot about the political system here, Ty Lee, Azula speculated, giving her a mistrusting glare. How do you know about all of this? Ty Lee just grinned sweetly in her direction. Oh, it's just stuff I picked up on my travels. What do you think about this, Aang? Aang? Azula asked the boy, garnering for his support. I don't care about politics, the Avatar replied. In his experience, the leaders of the nations were not worthy of his trust. The Earth Kingdom government was corrupt. The Fire Nations was all about absolute power. The Water Tribes was too traditional and primeval. Even the Air Monks of old based their decisions off of loose philosophy and, in some cases, misguided beliefs. Ty Lee continued to fend off Azula's arguments as they entered the town without trouble. This kept going so long that the shopping for supplies was left up to Zuko and Aang as they split from the two squabbling girls. Aang paid a shopkeeper with as many copper pieces as they could manage for supplies while Zuko brooded about something and was leaning against the counter. Hey, kid, a man said gruffly from behind Aang. The Avatar turned around hurriedly, either expecting an attack or some strange conversation from the man, but was mildly surprised when the smiling man's eyes were on Zuko. What? Zuko responded monotonously. You any good with them swords? The man asked, gesturing to the dual blades on Zuko's back. Zuko paused. I guess. He handed him a flyer. Then come and participate in the swordsmanship tournament, taking place tomorrow at the arena. All of the best swordsmen in the Fire Nation are attending. It's even rumored to be overseen by the great master Piandao himself. That struck Aang's interest. He stood up straighter and listened. It's just a rumor? Aang asked skeptically. Yeah. It is said that Master Piandao never comes out of his castle and into the public. The man looked to the castle standing tall over the city amidst the bustling people. Few have ever seen his face. Aang and Zuko followed his stare, now identifying the castle as Piandao's. Well, see you at the tournament. The two were silent for a moment while the man walked away. Then, Zuko turned to Aang, standing as tall as he could over Aang. I want to participate, he said. I already told you. We're getting to the Golden City tomorrow, Aang repeated sternly. We have no time for that. Zuko thrust the flyer into his face. Look. The winner of the tournament will get professional training. I can't pass up this opportunity. It's also 10 copper pieces to enter. We can't afford that. Zuko sighed and shook his head, hanging it dejectedly. You don't understand. I don't understand what? His question sounded just as interrogative as Azula's normally did, which he prided himself on. The three of you have your flashy skills in bending. I have nothing. I can't do anything to contribute to the fighting. He laughed to himself, mocking Aang in a high-pitched voice. Look at me, I'm tough and I can bend. Whoopee. He nearly shoved Aang into the wall and brought his face up near the shorter boys, accentuating his next words. Now it's my turn to shine. Aang was almost amused, but angry at Zuko for being so daring. The inexperienced swordsman took a step back from Aang and turned away, looking down at the flyer. Aang stared at the piece of paper. If Piandao was said to be there, Aang would have liked to see another familiar face. One that, like many others, died in the war for the Avatar's cause. Fine, we'll go since you feel so strongly about it, Aang conceded. Zuko nodded his head, allowing the smallest of a smirk on his face. Later that day, after Ty Lee somehow managed to scrounge up enough copper pieces, Zuko went to the arena to register for the tournament. As Zuko entered the arena, he scoped out the area and the competition. There were all kinds of swordsmen. Some looked weak and shy and barely old enough to hold a sword. Some seemed as if they never touched a weapon in their life. Others, however, walked with the steady grace of a grown warrior and held their weapons with experience. Everyone was standing around plainly, either checking out the other competition as he was or waiting for a chance to see Master Piandao, if the opportunity presented itself. And others were just there to boast, which Zuko quickly noticed as an eager crowd began to gather around a young, loud, boisterous man who was trying to gain as much attention and laughs as possible. Zuko was one of the few standing off to the side, arms crossed, showing absolutely no interest in the other boy. The whole arena was ovular in shape, with the stands all around and arranged like a stadium, the seats growing higher and higher as they spread outward. The ring was square and built from stone, providing plenty of room for the combatants to fight. The whole arena was covered with an expansive roof. "Hey, who are you?" Zuko sighed as he turned to the source of the voice, recognizing it as the big-headed warrior from moments ago. "Are you some kind of newbie?" Zuko simply glanced in his direction, giving the only acknowledgement he felt he deserved. He wasn't here to socialize. He was wearing a cocky grin. "Do you know who I am?" Sensing where this was heading, Zuko tried to edge away. "I'm not from around here." Big Head's fans started to congregate around the two. "Well, I'm Chan, the greatest swordsman here," he said boastfully, jerking a thumb at his chest. "And I'm the one who's gonna win the tournament and get training from Master Piandao." "You're awfully confident," Zuko said as a means to stall him, his golden eyes flickering from side to side, trying to find a gap in their growing audience. "Of course he is. He's stronger than any man in the Golden City, dude." "He came all the way from there," said another boy, casually flipping his hair out of his eyes. "Ruonjian, no need to brag," said Chan, waving him off with his hand. He turned his attention back to Zuko. "Well, anyway, there's no need for such an inexperienced fighter like you to enter this tournament, since you're probably just a weakling from one of the poor villages in the south or something. Save yourself the embarrassment. I wouldn't be surprised if you drew the wrong end of your sword." Zuko's hand reached to his broadswords on his back. "Want to see just how strong I am?" he challenged, bending his knees into a stance. Chan's own hand went to his hip. break it up," yelled one of the officiators, pushing past the people in the crowd. "Save it for the tournament." "You lucked out, newbie," Chan said with narrowed eyes. After that, he simply turned his back to Zuko and threw up a hand, gesturing for his fans to follow him away. "Yeah, lucky newbie," Ruonjian added as he left. "They're just rich pretty boys," Zuko chuckled to himself. Neither of the two looked like they could use a sword properly. Standing away from the dispersed crowd, leaning silently against a wall, a man in a hooded brown cloak watched the confrontation, his eyes obscured from any watchful competitors. "I don't see why you let him do this, Aang. I could have found a fire-bending master by the end of today." Azula complained to him the next morning, putting her hair up in her regular, constricting top knot, now adorned with her flamed headpiece. They were getting ready to go to the tournament. Zuko had left earlier, but Ty Lee was happy about the unexpected delay. "Oh, let him have his fun," the other girl said with a cheery smile. "He deserves it." To that, Azula just snorted and otherwise ignored her. "Even when we're away from home, Zuzu doesn't fail to annoy me as much as he can," Azula said with a snarl. "And I can't believe we're going to watch him. If it weren't for him, we'd be sitting in a luxurious Golden City suite instead of camping out here in this filth. I'm tired of it." "Just one more day, Azula," Aang said to her tiredly, beginning the walk back to town. All of the inns were packed with visitors coming to see the annual tourney, forcing them to camp outside for the night. "And what if Zuzu gets lucky and wins?" "We are not staying for the finals," the firebender replied staunchly. Aang honestly doubted Zuko would make it that far, but he didn't answer. They managed to beat most of the crowd as they headed to the large arena in the center of town, finding seats without too much trouble. Aang took a seat between Azula and Ty Lee, waiting for the matches to start. Azula crossed her legs boredly and examined her nails, showing absolutely no interest in the things going on around her. In contrast, Ty Lee was perky and alert on the other side of Aang. The boy squinted ahead, spotting the order of the matches and opponents on the other side of the arena. "Zuko's one of the first matches," Aang proclaimed. "Thank Agni," said Azula. Once he loses, we can get out of here quickly. You're so supportive of your brother, Ty Lee noted. Almost an hour later, when the stands were filled, a gong sounded and an announcer announced the start of the tournament and wished luck to all the competitors, but not before strictly outlining the rules, which were simple: knock your opponent down without killing them. He shouted thanks to the person who sponsored this tournament, Master Piandao, who was sitting on the other side of the arena in boxed seats, hidden behind drawn shades. However, Aang could make out the silhouette of a man sitting. Would Piandao show himself tonight? It seemed to be the question on everybody's minds. 3 matches passed by without too much excitement. It was mostly the slightly more experienced warriors weeding out the weaklings. According to Aang, some showed potential, but nobody so far had a chance of measuring up to Sokka, who was quite possibly the greatest swordsman alive in Aang's own world. Zuko's match was 4th. Azula did not seem to care, but on the other hand, Ty Lee had somehow procured a number 1 sign and was waving it enthusiastically, shouting out her boyfriend's name. Zuko reached the middle of the arena first. His opponent took his time getting there, walking with a swagger and lazily accepting the cheers of his fans. He was apparently well known. Ty Lee suddenly dropped what she was doing and jumped behind Aang, squeaking, "Hide me, hide me." "What? Why? From who?" Aang asked, perplexed. Ty Lee poked her head above his shoulder, revealing only her eyes. "Just stay here and hide me." "Oh, okay," Aang said uneasily, turning back to the match about to start. The two exchanged verbal banter for a moment before fighting. Azula huffed, showing her obvious displeasure at being there. "Oh, hey, look at that. I was lucky enough to face the newbie," Chan said with an arrogant smirk, drawing his straight, silver sword and twirling it in his hand. The audience yelled, "Let's see if the rookie is any good." Chan bent his legs into a stance and held his sword with one hand, beckoning Zuko on. In response, Zuko sighed and unsheathed his dual broadswords, spun them once, and let them settle into his call-used palms. "I'm ready to go." At those words, the battle was begun. Zuko attacked first, eager to wipe Chan's smirk off his face, dashing up to him and bringing his left blade up into an overhand chop. Predictably, Chan raised his blade fast enough to block, and Zuko attacked his exposed side with the other sword. Chan jumped backwards in a dodge, then resumed the attack just as quickly. Chan launched a barrage of sword swings at his opponent, clumsy and aggressive, but Zuko was finding them increasingly hard to block as Chan's speed increased. Zuko realized the futility of outright defending against Chan's attacks. It was doing nothing but sending painful vibrations down his arms and making them weaker. It was at that moment that Zuko remembered the distinctive curve his broadswords had, so he angled the weapons with the time of Chan's strikes so that his straighter sword rode down upon the curve upon impact, a parry. Zuko immediately took the chance and went at Chan's slackened defense, but the other boy brought up his knee and struck him in the gut. Zuko doubled over, but before Chan could slice him in the back, an illegal move, Zuko swept out his left broadsword at his exposed midriff, forcing him to dodge. Instead, as Zuko straightened, Chan took the chance and swatted Zuko's left sword aside, knocking the weapon right out of his hands. The weapon clattered to the floor. "What are you gonna do without your other broadsword?" Chan taunted, panting. "You're weak." Zuko didn't answer. He didn't think the shot to his gut was fair, but if the officials didn't call it, then it must have been legal. He gripped his remaining broadsword with both hands, ready to put as much power as possible behind each swing. Chan swung at Zuko, who blocked it over his head. Chan's blade rode along his own, and once it was free, Zuko flipped it around in a hack at his opponent's left side. However, Chan jumped backwards again and chose a different strategy, which was to repeatedly stab at Zuko. His wider broadsword was able to block a good amount of the blows. Somehow, he managed to catch one in his blade and twist it so that Chan's sword rode along the edge again, this time locking it near the hilt. Zuko and Chan pushed their blades against each other, straining as it became a contest of strength. Their faces were close, both were able to see the sweat on the other's face. Realizing they were going nowhere, Zuko simply twisted his weapon aside and brought up his right elbow, slamming it into Chan's face. The crowd favorite let out a cry of pain at the impact, doubled over and clutched his face. From there, Zuko jabbed the hilt of his lonely sword into Chan's shoulder, knocking him to the ground. The stands were quiet. Their favorite had been defeated, by a rookie. Azula moaned. So now we have to stay here longer. A few hours later, and after the crowd calmed down, Zuko was preparing for his next match against a name Aang didn't recognize. The Avatar, his sister, and Ty Lee joined him down next to the ring, giving him a bit of moral support before his next match. This came in the form of solely Ty Lee, as Azula picked out all his mistakes and generally tried to make him feel worse. That was amazing, you're sure to do great. That was absolutely pathetic. I can't believe you lost your sword. Pow wow. That was you when you knocked him in the face with your elbow. Our aging uncle could fight better. And then, wham, he fell to the ground. Your grip was weak. Your muscles were all bulgy. You stood still like a statue. Shut up. Aang shouted to the two of them. There was a short moment of silence, and then they continued. Good luck on your next match. You're up now. I'll be looking forward to your horrendous failure. Just get going, Aang said quietly to Zuko, pushing him forward onto the arena. Zuko nodded, gripping his broadswords in his hands as he walked to the center, barely listening to the announcer as he shouted out the next match. This match's combatants are Zuko and Lee. Zuko watched his opponent walk to meet him in the center, gulping down his nervousness. This man looked much more experienced with a sword than Chan did. He walked with a warrior's grace. He was garbed in a tattered brown cloak, his hood drawn up and covering his eyes, shadowing the man's full face. He unsheathed a Jian long sword from somewhere within the folds of his cloak, gripping the hilt tightly without a word to Zuko. The younger boy settled into a stance. Begin. Just as in the first battle, Zuko commenced the match by rushing forward with his dual blades, sweeping them both out horizontally. Lee skillfully blocked them both, stepping backwards and lunging forward with his sword, as if experimentally testing Zuko's defenses. Zuko caught the blade between both of his, but Lee slid it along the edge and freed his own weapon in a shower of sparks. You're as still as a statue. Use some footwork, Lee whispered to him, slashing diagonally with his sword. Zuko raised an eyebrow in surprise, but sidestepped the blow and tried to cut toward Lee's shoulder. Somehow, Lee brought his sword up fast enough to block, bouncing Zuko back. Following up the attack, Lee jabbed him in the gut with the sword's hilt. Ouch. That didn't look too pleasant, Ty Lee cringed from the sidelines. Go for the neck. The neck. She's crazy, Aang mentioned to Azula, edging away from the acrobat. No. Go for the eyes. Azula shouted to her brother. Recovering quickly, Zuko brought up his left sword just in time to block another blow with the base of his blade. However, he was holding that weapon upside down now and it was hard to twist it fast enough to follow up on another attack. Lee attacked again, forcing the hindered blade back towards Zuko's arm, making it seem like an elongated tonfa. Once Lee paused long enough, Zuko switched to offense again, trying to get his opponent into a pincer attack with both of his weapons. The maneuver seemed to surprise him, nearly slicing off his head. Lee was just able to bend backwards quickly enough to see the blades crossing where his head was mere moments before. Taking advantage of his bent position, Lee thrust out one of his feet, kicking Zuko away from him. Once they were far enough apart, Lee apparently decided to get serious. He pulled off his brown cloak, revealing surprisingly tan skin and brown hair tied back into a top knot, with a matching goatee. Aang stood quickly from his seat on the ground. That's Piandao. He muttered quietly. Azula glanced at him inquisitively, but no one else seemed to care about the man's revealed identity. Was there truly no one who had seen his face in public before? Zuko is going to lose, Aang said flatly. What was Piandao doing, entering his own tournament under an alias? It obviously had to be someone else who was up in the boxed seats. Surprising move, boy, Lee said just loudly enough for Zuko to hear. You nearly won the match. Time for me to get serious. You're awfully confident, old man, Zuko replied wryly. Lee simply smirked, replying with 3 simple jabs of his blade, 2 of which were blocked by Zuko's swords. He jumped backwards to avoid the last one. Good, good. You're using your feet, Lee complimented. What was going on with this guy? As they continuously traded attacks, Lee kept speaking. Time your attacks carefully. You just missed a flaw in my defense. With Lee's next block, he pushed forward on the locked blades with all of his strength, a surprising amount, and knocking Zuko backwards. As he stumbled, Lee continued on the offense, rushing forward with his blades toward Zuko's open front. Zuko did the only thing he could to dodge, he fell backwards. Lee jumped at him with a stab directed at the ground, which Zuko barely managed to avoid with wide eyes. If he didn't roll out of the way in time, he would have been impaled. Zuko stood again, balancing on the tips of his toes for a moment. Since most blade weapons were legal in the fights, he hastily reached into a pouch at his hip and threw a barrage of Mai's kunao at the older fighter, which were parried deftly. Daggers? What a curious way to fight someone, Lee commented, twisting his sword around to slash at Zuko. He managed to block the blow, but Lee's blade danced around the edges and scored an attack on Zuko's face with the full force of the hilt, knocking him backwards and causing him to see stars. Lee took the chance and palmed him in the chest, sending the boy skidding to the edge of the ring, where he crumpled to the ground. Zuko groaned in pain, clutching his aching head. Ready to give up, boy? Lee taunted. This isn't the kind of place for you. Go back to your village where you belong. Angered by his words, Zuko staggered to his feet, panting all the while. He pulled his hands from his head to his swords, gripping them between white knuckles. I'm not gonna fall to you so easily, he replied through clenched teeth. Good, Lee replied with a grim smile, running at Zuko and swinging his sword with both hands. In response, Zuko joined his swords together into a single blade, swinging it to avoid Lee's attacks. When Zuko attacked with a horizontal slash, Lee ducked clean under the blow and swept out his foot, knocking Zuko to the ground once again. He landed in a heap as Lee stood. You are too tired to fight now. This match is over, Lee called to the announcer. Wait. Zuko yelled, clearly in agonized pain. His brow was stained with sweat, his lip was puffy and bleeding, and his cheek was darkly bruised. I'm not done yet. Lee stared at him critically, as if asking the boy if he was sure. When Zuko did not back down, Lee readied his blade again. Very well. Determined to end the match quickly in sake of the boy's health, Lee lightly cut him in the arms, legs, face, and abdomen, drawing shockingly red blood. It only seemed to spur Zuko on further, driving him into a furious attack, swinging his conjoined sword with all of his strength. You're fighting recklessly, Lee said between strikes, his voice beginning to show strain. Calm your mind in order to fight victoriously, he thought to himself. Finally, after several more swings of his sword, Zuko's arms began to weigh down and his movements became sluggish. His eyes seemed about to glaze over, his knees were giving out. He was ready to collapse. He had been fighting all day. Lee simply stopped attacking, and Zuko fell to his knees, unable to fight any longer. Lee himself was out of breath. You fought well, the older man said to him. Thanks, you're good for an old man, Zuko managed to say between breaths. It was an honor to fight you. As soon as the match ended and the announcer proclaimed the winner, Aang, Azula, and Ty Lee rushed onto the fighting arena as the crowd erupted into cheers. Ty Lee went to Zuko's aid and Aang went to meet Piandao, while Azula stood by idly. The old sword master was examining a set of cuts on his arms that seemed to surprise him when he noticed Aang. Good evening, Avatar, the man greeted him, showing just as much knowledge that he wasn't supposed to know as he used to. He knelt down and offered a hand to Zuko and spoke to him. I am Master Piandao, and I'm extending an offer to teach you the ways of the sword. Chapter 17, The Sword Master. Zuko steeled himself as he walked up to Piandao's estate at the top of the hill, concentrating on the uneven ground at his feet. The grass in the fields all around him swayed with the wind. It was a calming presence. Unconsciously, he looked to the horizon for the sea, but Piandao's castle blocked his view. He gulped. For some reason, he felt inexplicably nervous. He needed this. He had to prove himself to his friends. That thought pushed him forward. His boots padded against the rocky path as he climbed the slight slope. As he neared the gigantic doors, he examined the design etched into the rock. It was a white lotus carved beautifully on the doors, made out of white stone but outlined in gold. For some strange reason, the design seemed to match the one on Aang's headband. As he approached the door, Zuko took a deep, calming breath, and raised his hand to the ornate gold knocker. A sudden rush of wind took him by surprise, ruffling his hair and clothes. The next moment, Aang was there, skidding to a halt at Zuko's side. He was panting. "I came here as fast as I could," Aang said, straightening. He patted his orange clothing, cleaning it of dirt and wrinkles. "Why? What's wrong?" Zuko asked, his eyes narrowing in concern. "Had something happened?" "Nothing's wrong. I'd also like to train with Master Piandao." Aang's words rushed through his head like a gust of wind, clearing his mind of any other thought. Aang, the Avatar, wanted to learn how to wield a sword? More importantly, he was taking it away from Zuko. Mastering the way of the sword was his way of helping his friends. It was supposed to make him unique and helpful. Aang could not learn it. It was the way of non-benders, like him. "Why?" Zuko asked darkly. Aang, apparently, did not expect this reaction. "I thought it would be helpful," he replied, giving Zuko a significant stare. It clearly said not to cross him. Without another word, Aang banged the knocker against the heavy doors. It was opened by one of Piandao's servants right before Zuko opened his mouth to argue. "Yes?" the man asked. He seemed snobbish to Aang. However, he saw Zuko. "Ah, you must be the new student. You may come inside." Zuko smirked victoriously at Aang as he was let in. "Wait, I'd also like to train under the master," Aang said hurriedly. The butler sighed. "Fine. Let's get this over with." The butler led the two down long, fanciful hallways, all of which depicted ornate white lotus designs or murals of ancient, long-forgotten lion turtles. Aang peered at all of these curiously while Zuko spent the whole time glaring at him. The Avatar refused to look in his direction. Finally, the group of three stopped in front of another set of large doors. "I think this goes without saying, but show respect to the master," the butler yawned, pushing open the doors. Both Aang and Zuko gasped at the sheer size of the room and a whole wall that seemed to be made of windows, overlooking the calm ocean below. Piandao stood at this window with his back to them, his hands folded behind his back, staring at the rising sun, almost at its zenith. "Zuko, how good to see you," the sword master greeted, turning to face him. His eyes calmly wandered over to Aang, fixed for a moment on his white lotus headband, and then spoke again. "I see you have brought a friend." Aang greeted him with a traditional Fire Nation bow. "My name is Aang. I would also like to learn the ways of the sword." "Zuko, did you think I would take on a second student just because he was your friend?" Piandao questioned. "No, master," Zuko said, glancing at Aang. "I just found out he wanted to learn under you, too. I am curious as to why the Avatar would want to pick up a blade," he said calmly. "Is bending not enough for you? Swordsmanship is a much more delicate art." Aang's eyes widened. How was Piandao always able to figure out he was the Avatar before they even met? To answer his question, Aang thought back to his dream the day before an incarceration in Bato's water-filled ice prison. He had nearly died, and bending had failed him. His own strength had failed him. He could not let something like that happen again. He needed to be prepared for all situations. He remembered how easily Sokka was able to use his sword to cut through ice and metal. And if one of his enemies wanted to fight near him in close quarters, a staff would not be enough. He was also interested to see how his bending could be augmented with a weapon such as a Jian, and, like always, he was curious about something he had never done before. The more he changed, the more he stayed the same. Finally, Aang answered him. "Bending. It is a part of me. It's what I rely on," he said carefully. "But when it fails me, that's the worst feeling in the world. I almost died recently and I realized something. I cannot rely solely on my bending. I felt so helpless. I'm willing to do anything that will help me defeat the Water Emperor." Piandao stared at him for a long time, as if trying to see if he was sincere. Aang did not falter under his scrutinizing gaze. "Very well," he said finally. He walked around his desk, putting both of his hands on each of their shoulders. I will make you two into worthy warriors. They went to their training immediately, but very quickly, Aang decided that it was the strangest training he had ever undertaken. Aang and Zuko were to wear identical, black uniforms trimmed in gold, but otherwise, they were plain and loose-fitting. They started with calligraphy. The students sat next to each other at their master's desk, brushes poised over scrolls of parchment. Aang dipped it into black paint and pulled back his sleeve, preparing to write about several things, as they were instructed to. After mulling it over for a moment, he began with a short poem often recited to him by Monk Gyatso, and one he heard a few times by Iroh before he was killed. Unfortunately for Aang, he had not written any calligraphy in an extremely long time, probably since he was with the monks many years ago, but he remembered most of it and his writing was neat enough. Zuko, evidently, was not educated much in the ways of calligraphy, which Aang noticed upon peering at his paper. He struggled with simple words and carefully held his brush straight. He knew Zuko was literate, because Iroh doubtlessly educated him and his sister, but he was still having trouble. Next, they were told to arrange rock gardens outside. Apparently, it was supposed to teach one how to use their environment to their advantage. After Piandao gave him a strict warning not to use any earthbending, which Aang matter-of-factly replied that he did not yet know how, Aang and Zuko went to work. Here, too, Aang had to think long and hard. He much preferred to have rocks revolving around him, ready to strike at his foes, but Aang pushed several tall rocks toward his side of the garden, because Zuko drew a line cutting right through the middle, strictly telling him not to go near his own side. After arranging his rocks as he saw fit, Aang had several spires shooting out of the ground, creating a wind tunnel effect. He proudly displayed it to Piandao, even shooting a long, continuous blast of air, which was greatly enhanced by the placement of the rocks. The master seemed to disapprove of it slightly, but Aang dryly informed him that airbending was not against the rules. Zuko ended with a measly pile of rocks and boulders, which he claimed gave him the high ground against his foes. Aang smiled proudly. He was doing better than his friend, when he had no previous knowledge of sword fighting. Unnoticed by him, Zuko was silently fuming in anger at the Avatar. "Ugh," Azula moaned, "I can't believe the two of them left me to babysit you." Very much annoyed, the firebender lounged around in the camp with only Ty Lee for company. The acrobat was flipping around, constantly chattering about Zuko and steadily giving Azula a headache. "Hey, I'm not a baby. And you're not sitting on me," the other girl protested. "Why are you so grumpy lately?" She propped her head up on her elbows, stretching her feet around to scratch her forehead. "Because I'm supposed to have a firebending master by now," she said angrily, her fingertips smoking. "We should have left this place already. Knowing Zuzu, it'll take him months to master that piece of metal, if he even can. Honestly, it'll be up to Aang to train him so we can leave quickly. What makes you think Aang will master swordsmanship first?" Ty Lee pondered. "You seem to hold him in high regard." "What? You don't think he can?" "He is the Avatar and he is not a bumbling idiot, most of the time," Azula said, waving her hand at the obvious. "I don't think that's your real reason," Ty Lee said, edging up to her slyly. "You like Aang, don't you?" Azula sputtered for a moment, which was something Ty Lee found absurdly funny. "What are you talking about?" "I don't like anybody." "I dunno, Azula. You make it very obvious." "Ha." Azula scoffed, "You're about as perceptive as a child. You know, they always say children are the most perceptive." "Well, then you are a fool," Azula replied, examining her nails. "I'm done with this subject. Stop edging around it, Azula. This isn't like you. Do you want Aang to like you or not? I can get him to like you." When Azula didn't answer, Ty Lee continued. "I mean, I can see why you like him. He's pretty cute, if you get over how short he is. And he's noble. And strong and brave. He seems like the sorta guy for you." "You said, you can get him to like me?" Azula asked, barely glancing up at Ty Lee. The girl's face broke out into one of the largest smiles she had ever seen. "Of course. I'm a pro at that." Acknowledging her victory, Ty Lee proceeded to give Azula some more boy advice. Zuko was fuming. He was so angry at Aang. Why would he want to learn how to use a sword? It didn't make sense to him, not when Aang was so talented already. Zuko wanted his own skill to make himself look better in his friend's eyes, but Aang was taking that away. Piandao noticed his frustrations as Aang walked off. You are jealous, Piandao noted, staring at Aang's back. Yeah, Zuko agreed, glaring at his friend. Dismiss it, the older man said. A feeling such as jealousy is not helpful on the battlefield. But everything always comes so easily to him, Zuko said dejectedly. The kid's so strong. And me? I'm just a failure. I always have been. Give yourself some credit, you were the one fighting so well in the tournament, not Aang, the master said to him. Self-loathing is also not a useful trait to have on the battlefield. I know, but... Piandao cut him off. I initially chose you as my student above all the other competition, not because you won, but because of your fierce determination and willingness to fight. You had much more potential than any other person there. Zuko was stunned into silence, and Piandao's mouth curved. Just think on that. Piandao was surprisingly lenient. After the rock garden arrangements, he allowed the two to have a break. The three of them were seated around a table in the swordsman's beautiful courtyard, the sun beating down on them warmly. They were served tea and small vanilla cream cakes by the butler. Aang especially loved the sweet dessert. After that, they were finally handed practice swords. Right in the back of Piandao's castle was an even square made of stone, which served as Piandao's personal practice ring. Zuko was fighting first in a duel against the butler, Fat, who was surprisingly a skilled swordsman. Both were in padded armor, fighting with dulled blades. Zuko held up well against the butler, but once he was disarmed, Piandao immediately gave him critiques. He commented on Zuko's horrible footwork yet again, but noted his superior speed and advantage of youth. Zuko was fast at blocking and quick to resume the attack. He had skill with the sword, but it was not yet refined. Zuko smirked at Aang as he passed, as if daring him to do better. The boy did not back down from the challenge. He held the sword protectively in front of him in a clumsy stance, unused to the strange weight in his hands. When Piandao asked if they were ready, Fat and Aang nodded. When they did, Fat waited for Aang to attack. The avatar started off with a swipe to the man's midsection, which was very easily blocked. The butler slid his blade along his opponent's and sent it spinning out of his hand. It clattered to the ground. Aang smiled sheepishly at Piandao. You've never held a sword in your life, have you? Piandao asked him, raising an eyebrow. Nope, Aang said truthfully. Zuko was snickering, but he ignored him. First, you've got to start on your grip. Second, watch your stance. It was horribly flawed and you would have fallen easily if Fat attacked you first. Piandao showed him appropriate offensive and defensive stances, which Aang copied until he memorized. Then, like a young child, Fat impatiently taught him easy blocking and attacking techniques, the correct way to hold his sword, and Piandao told him that it was his own duty to make a proper judgment in battle. Aang nodded, absorbing as much information as he could into his head. Over the course of the training, Aang improved slightly, and Piandao noticed his vastly superior agility even without the use of his airbending, which, as before, he was forbidden to use. Piandao strictly told him not to use any bending. So far, Aang's only expertise was in his dodging. Don't think you're getting any special treatment because you're the Avatar, Piandao once said to him. Finally, Aang and Zuko were paired up to duel each other. It was an event Aang had foreseen since the beginning of the training, and he was not looking forward to it. Zuko was still angry at him, but slightly arrogant because of the fact that he was a more experienced swordsman than Aang. The two took identical stances. Before Piandao officially started the fight, Zuko and Aang attacked each other. For them, it was more than just a friendly duel now. It was an all-out competition. It was a battle of honor. Their swords met right in between the two, clashing with a flash of sparks. Zuko immediately brought his sword around to try and strike Aang's shoulder, but he was able to block it in time. Aang backflipped away from him, getting distance, and then rushed toward his opponent again with his sword held high. Again, they met in the middle of their rushes, colliding with surprising force that sent quivers down Aang's arm. Quickly, Zuko moved to attack Aang with several quick stabs, very few of which he managed to swat out of the way. Using only one hand to hold his sword, Aang jumped out of the way of Zuko's furious barrage. His opponent's sword followed him, and at that moment Aang realized the only advantage he had, his speed. "Good, Aang. Use your advantages," Piandao said. The boy used his reflexes to duck under Zuko's horizontal swings, to jump to the right of his vertical ones. He rarely used his sword to block, instead preferring to strike lightly where it would matter. Fighting one-handedly gave him more speed, two hands gave him power. As was usual, he preferred speed, so getting in quick bites with his sword suited his style. Aang was using the circular motions of an airbender, constantly revolving around Zuko in an attempt to confuse him. "Make the right judgments," their master spoke. Soon, Zuko figured out his pattern and cut off Aang's movements with a sharp stab of his blunt sword, then walked forward aggressively, backing Aang to the edge of the ring. Aang was forced to jump off of it and into the grass, but Zuko continued the attack, utilizing the high ground. Aang was able to block some of his swings, but was unluckily bruised on his sword arm when Zuko managed to hit him. He was being quickly overwhelmed and forced to fight defensively. He tried to parry once, but Zuko didn't fall for it. "Zuko, go for the finish, Aang, nice try on the parrying." With one last powerful swing, Zuko knocked Aang's sword out of his hand. The Avatar was defeated. Aang gracefully accepted the defeat, bowing to Zuko. The teenager returned the bow, as was custom. Azula would never have pictured this scene. She and Ty Lee continued to talk about herself and Aang, and the acrobat gave her tons of advice. First of all, she was expected to be nicer. Second, Ty Lee seemed to have a problem with her looks. "You have so much hair, Azula. Let it be free. When your hair is up, you make yourself seem strict and intimidating. Boys don't like that. Be more laid back," the girl said. "Smile a bit more." Now, Ty Lee was combing Azula's hair, freeing it of the knots and tangles she had acquired during her travels. Azula's golden headpiece was laid off gently to the side. As Ty Lee combed, Azula felt her eyes closing as she was comforted by the feeling. It had been a long time since someone else had combed her hair. She remembered, several years ago, how her mother used to comb it. It was so relaxing. Mother always said she loved her hair, thick and the darkest shade of black. Mother was always able to make it silky and smooth, and Azula never figured out how. Azula waited patiently as Ty Lee lathered her hair with some of her exotic products, rinsed it, and fashioned it as she saw fit. Once that was done, Ty Lee let it dry naturally. Next, the acrobat fished for a kit in her personal bag, pulling out a golden object. "What is that?" Azula asked sharply. In response, Ty Lee popped the top off of the object, revealing a ruby-red substance. "Lipstick," she replied cheerily. "We're going for something simple here, but the color fits you. It's gonna look nice." "If you say so," Azula said uneasily. "Now it's time for the two of you to make swords of your own," Piandao said, leading the two to his workshop. Once they entered the room, both sets of gray and gold eyes widened, seeing the numerous, expertly crafted swords hung on the walls and laid out in rows. The room was hot, dominated largely by a furnace used for smithying. "Actually, let me see your broadswords, Zuko." Zuko did as he was told, unsheathing them and handing them to Piandao. "They are of a fine quality, and you are doing an excellent job taking care of them." He tested the weight. "Not my type of sword, but you are proficient in the use of these. I would say to keep using them. You will not need to forge your own." "Thank you, Master," Zuko said with a nod, taking his swords back and sheathing them. Aang's eyes roamed the room, landing on a jet-black blade laid out on a table, next to a decorative sheath. It was Sokka's meteorite blade, which Aang knew very well. "Master, what's that?" Aang asked Piandao, pointing to the black sword. "Ah." Piandao walked up to the sword, lifting it from the table. "This is the best blade I have ever created, and my favorite. I forged it from a meteorite that had landed here a few years ago." He stared at the sword for a few moments, then turned to Zuko. "You may leave now. Aang has to stay here to make his sword. It will go on well through the night." "Thank you, master. I'll return in the morning, said the teenager. Without another word, he turned to leave. Wait. Zuko stopped. It will not be necessary for you to return, said Piandao. He turned toward his older student. You are a skilled swordsman already. It is my firm belief that you do not need any further training, as you have already learned much on your travels. But, master. It's only been a day, Zuko protested. And I'm still not that good. Your travels with the Avatar are more important, Piandao said. And value yourself and your skills more. I have said already that you have an astounding amount of potential and raw ability to go with it. You have a fierce determination like the strongest, most noble lion turtle. Not only that, but you are strong enough to train Aang now. What? Zuko exclaimed. No more can be learned from me. The way of the sword is one that you must discover for yourself. Aang was speechless. He would be learning from Zuko again, but this time it would be something different. This unexpected turn of events did not make him upset. In fact, he looked forward to training with Zuko again. And you, Aang. I sense in you much pain, conflict, death, and destruction, but a willingness to help your friends and fight to your last breath. You are also a worthy swordsman, and I willingly entrust your training to Zuko. Thank you, master, Aang said with a bow. But first, we will make your sword, Piandao said. Zuko, you may leave now. Farewell, master, Zuko said with another bow. I don't know what else to say. Piandao smiled. You have been my greatest student. First, before even making his blade, Aang had to critically examine each of the materials for a sword that Piandao had to offer. He tested the weight, durability, and malleability, and went off of Piandao's advice. Finally, Aang had to conclude that none of the materials suited him. He had his mind set on a certain, specific type. An hour after Zuko left, Aang turned to Piandao. Master, can I use a material of my own? He asked after some thought. Of course, Aang, the older man said. That would be preferred. Great. I'll be back in the morning, then, he said. He bowed in farewell, and the Avatar was on his way. That was not his intention at all. Aang went out into the night, but instead of going back to camp, he waited in the forest on the outskirts of town. He sat up on a tree branch and did not move for several hours, preparing himself for what he was about to do. When it was finally midnight, Aang leapt from the tree branch, rubbing his sore backside. He avoided the town altogether, heading toward Piandao's castle wall. His airbending easily enabled him to soar right over the high walls. Still clad in his dark uniform, he was unseen in the night. The boy made his way over to Piandao's forge, which was open to the outside in order for the smoke from the furnace to go out into the air. Aang lit a small flame in his palm as he wandered over to the master's collection of swords. Once he found the black meteorite sword, he grinned to himself. The light of the fire was reflected off of the black blade eerily. Slowly, Aang's hand closed around the hilt. Before he could lift it, a white sword pinned it to the table. Aang looked up at the person responsible in shock. Piandao was there. He was caught. You are easy to read, Avatar, the man said. My sword is not being stolen tonight. Determined not to give up the blade, Aang commanded the fire to leap into the man's face, which distracted him long enough to let go of his sword, letting Aang pull the meteorite one free. Aang jumped backwards onto another table, holding the black sword ready. It fit comfortably in his palm. Piandao pulled his arm away from his face. The fire served only as a distraction, it was not meant to harm the man. I'm sorry for doing this, but I really want this sword, Aang said as way of explanation. You'll have to fight for it, Piandao challenged, swiping at the table Aang was standing on. The Avatar leapt backwards on a cushion of air, determined to put distance between the two. He turned his back for only a moment to run out of the enclosed room and out into the training arena, which was just outside. When he turned his head to see where his opponent was, he was met with shock when Piandao was much closer than he realized. Aang turned around long enough to swing his sword 3 times, using the inertia to cut 3 swathes with his airbending, all of which hit the older man. The force of the attack threw him back into the destroyed table, but Aang looked at his sword in shock. He barely put any force into his airbending. The blade amplified and condensed the air blasts that much. The possibilities of how fine he could make them entered his brain, and he grinned. He knew how much that kind of offensive power went against airbender philosophy, but at the moment he didn't care. He wondered why all other airbenders didn't use swords. Piandao would not be getting his sword back today. The older man recovered quicker than Aang would have thought, rushing at the boy again with his sword raised. Aang swung the meteorite blade one time, but Piandao was wise enough to dodge the blow. With remarkable agility, the man was able to dodge all subsequent strikes. He was nearing Aang, so the boy jumped backward into an air current that lifted him higher into the air, but the avatar condensed the wind around him and focused it on his blade, swinging it and utilizing all of the sword's cutting power. Aang landed on the top of Piandao's shingled wall as he watched the effects of his arc of wind. Good. Utilize your bending advantage. Piandao shouted at him. Aang raised an eyebrow. Was Piandao really giving him a lesson at a time like this? The older man managed to jump against the wall and kick off of it like a springboard, propelling himself away from the effects of Aang's attack. Aang was very impressed by the power the sword gave him. There was enough cutting power to make a mark on a rock. And it was quite a deep mark in the ground, too. Aang made this thought clear in his head. He was not trying to kill Piandao, he was just testing the new, interesting abilities the meteorite sword gave him. Satisfied with the results, he sent 3 small fireballs down on Piandao to distract him, then he leapt off of the wall and into the night. Piandao's sword cut through the 3 fireballs with ease, dissipating them. Immense disappointment for his student welled up inside of him, but the master did not pursue him further. For now, he would let the avatar have the blade, for he had won it. But he would fight another day. He was going to get the meteorite sword back. Aang spent the rest of his night away from camp, just in case one of his friends were still awake and questioned his earlier than expected return. He waited until early the next morning to go back, where he found all 3 of them awake. Zuko was the first to spot the naked sword at his hip. He actually let you have that? He asked in shock. The boy put down his breakfast next to the fire and got up to stand in front of Aang. No, he didn't, Aang said truthfully. Then he lied. He still had material left over from the meteorite. We forged a second one. Wow. That's an amazing blade, Zuko said. For a moment, there was an awkward silence between them. Look, I'm sorry, they both said at once. Aang chuckled. You go first, Zuko said. I'm sorry, Zuko, Aang said. I know you wanted to learn how to properly wield a sword yourself, but... Aang, that's not important, Zuko interrupted. I'm the one who's sorry. I was being selfish, he said shamefully. There was another moment of silence, but Aang held out his hand in forgiveness. Well, I better get used to calling you master, Aang said to him with a grin. It was now Zuko's turn to chuckle. Yeah, he said, scratching the back of his neck. I hope I don't mess up. I bet you're a good teacher, Aang told him. He knew he was. Well, let's get out of here. We should reach the Golden City by the end of today. Finally, Azula said, standing up to greet him. Aang's jaw dropped. Her hair was free from her regular topknot, falling down past her shoulders in dark waves. He had seen her with her hair down so many times before, but now she looked like Katara. Specifically, the way Katara did while they were hiding in the Fire Nation before the solar eclipse. Azula's hair was wavy and thick and dark, but her characteristic bangs were still there instead of the specific style Katara preferred. Azula's hair was still up in a topknot, but her shining golden headpiece was stuck in it, reflecting the light of the sun. In addition, Azula was wearing red lipstick, something he had never seen her wear in this world, but something he never saw her without in his own world. Ty Lee giggled. He's speechless. Azula was wringing her fingers together. Comment her, Anji. Ty Lee barked at him. You look good, Azula, he said, scratching the back of his neck. Blood was rushing to his face. Azula laughed softly, uncharacteristically. Thanks, she said. A moment later, when nobody did anything, except for Zuko, who gaped in horror, Azula suddenly snapped to attention, and she was suddenly Azula again. Now, let's get going. I'm ready to master firebending. She held her palms out, flames blazing in each of them. Aang laughed, noticing that the camp was already mostly packed up in preparation for leaving, which was no doubt Azula's work. Yeah, let's go. As the four friends got into Appa's saddle and flew into the sky, each of their minds were on different things. Ty Lee and Azula were both facing the Golden City, one with trepidation, the other with excitement. Azula was thinking only of her firebending. Zuko's eyes were on the landmass they were just leaving, thinking about the master they were leaving behind and the problems he may encounter with his own sword training, still thinking he wasn't ready. And Aang's eyes were on the meteorite sword, still without a sheath. He felt slightly guilty for stealing it, but he kept remembering who it belonged to. The sword was Sokka's. And one day, he would get it back. Aang vowed to give it to him once Sokka was on his side. He was willing to do anything for the greater good. As they always said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Chapter 18, Agni's Eye. Even with Fire Lord Azula far away in the Fire Nation, her presence in Ba Sing Se could still be keenly felt. Aang kept his head down as he walked with Suki and Haru through the lower ring. Dai Li agents stood in front of a blazing building, the light from the fire casting them in long shadows. House burnings were a favorite pastime of Azula's, her way of smoking out dissidents who fought for a free Earth kingdom. With all the buildings in this ring so close together, the fires spread to the whole city block, devouring her enemies and many more besides. If the city was a pie show board, then Azula was the destructive child who swept away all of her opponent's tiles. Aang and his companions had found it easy to enter the city after the destruction of the outer walls during Sozin's comet. Oze's destruction had been stopped right at the walls of the lower ring, but everything outside of it had been burnt to ash. Vast fields of farmland vanished in the span of a single day and starvation choked the people of Ba Sing Se just as much as the smoke from all of Azula's burnings. He felt its heat as he walked the perimeter of the city block. Sokka, Katara, Toph, and Zuko had gone into the maze of apartments built on top of each other over the years to find people stuck inside the burning building, and it was the job of Aang, Suki, and Haru to make sure the Dai Li didn't notice. Refugees of the lower ring watched the burning with defeated looks on their faces. This had become a common occurrence for them. Their expressions made Aang feel a dull ache in his chest. He hoped they would succeed in their ultimate reason for coming back to this city, to free it from Fire Nation rule. Suki squeezed Aang's wrist, a sharp pain to grab his attention. His head shot in the direction she faced and his heart pounded with dread when he spotted Ty Lee among the crowd. She stared into the fire, the light gone from her eyes. She hadn't even noticed them as the trio dispersed into the alleyways surrounding this city block. By the time they got a safe distance away, Haru turned to them, panting. "What is it? What happened?" "We saw Ty Lee," said Suki, her face grim. "Sokka and the others need to get out of there. We can't fight her here, not with all these Dai Li. And all these people." Worse than Ty Lee was the portent of what her presence meant. "Azula can't be far. She wasn't supposed to come to Ba Sing Se this month," Aang said. "They had to get out, but it would be tricky. The most dangerous part of Ba Sing Se was that they couldn't bring Appa there for a quick getaway." Black smoke churned into the sky and the light from the fire cast a shade of crimson into the sunset that reminded Aang of blood. But even far away from it, with several buildings between them, Aang could feel its heat. And then the burning turned blue. According to Ty Lee, the northern tip of the Fire Nation had been born entirely from volcanic activity, layer upon layer building up over thousands of years. A good majority of the small continent was a volcanic field, constantly spewing ash into the sky and lava all over the ground and into the water, consistently creating new land and covering the old. As a result, the island was relatively new compared to the rest of the Fire Nation, and the soil was perhaps the most fertile in the world, untouched by the war with the Water Empire. With volcanoes covering the whole island, the Golden City was safely protected, nestled in the caldera of a grand dormant one even bigger than the old Fire Nation capital. Agni himself was said to protect his people from the poisonous fumes of the surrounding giants. The first dragon blessed them with eternal crops and the light of the sun, keeping the people of the Golden City self-sufficient and safe from the war. The heat of the sun and the warm wind on his face made Aang grin. He tried to forget the remnants of last night's dream and shared in the delight of Azula at the end of their quest to find a fire-bending master. The Golden City was finally in front of them. Azula, barely able to contain her enthusiasm, used her only outlets to let it all out, Zuko and her fire-bending. She incessantly teased her brother with blasts of fire from her knuckles, trying to scare him into jumping in the ocean. On the other side of the saddle, Ty Lee sat with her knees folded tightly, biting her thumb as she stared blankly ahead of them with wide, grey eyes. Aang adjusted his headband and moved from Appa's head to sit by her side. "So you're finally going to tell us your secret, aren't you?" Aang asked her. He didn't want to pressure her, not least because of his own secrets he kept from his friends, but he worried even now that her secret had the potential to endanger them. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Instead, she continued to stare into space. Finally, she nodded. I think it was a mistake coming with you," she said, her voice quavering. "Don't say that," Aang said, frowning slightly. "You had a great time traveling with us. We enjoy your company." Zuko finally managed to edge away from Azula, crawling across Appa's saddle to sit behind Ty Lee. "Yeah, you're part of our family now." "Well, it's awkward for me to call you family, but, you know, it's by association." He shrugged awkwardly, his face burning a bright red. "Now even I kinda like you," Azula said, sliding over to sit in front of her. The firebender kept her new hairstyle. It was now flying freely in the wind, part of it held in a golden topknot which shined in the sun. "No matter what happens there, you're always welcome to stay with us, wherever we go," Aang said. Ty Lee gave them all a wistful smile and her eye began to tear. She hurriedly wiped it away with her palm. "Thanks, guys," she said. "Really? I don't deserve this." Sabi cooed and soared over to Ty Lee's shoulder, licking her face. "Even Sabi loves you," Zuko said, grinning. Ty Lee sat up and gave a real smile, one of her brightest ones yet. She held out her arms and grabbed Zuko and Azula around the neck, pulling them into a hug. "You join us too, Aang." Aang looked at the three of his friends. Azula was stunned but Zuko had one arm around Ty Lee. Slowly, he extended his arms around Zuko and Azula, completing the circle. Ty Lee squeezed them all happily, bringing memories back to Aang of older hugs with his other family. The thought had settled onto him like a heavy mantle weighing him down. Sabi scurried into the middle of them all, nuzzling against their legs. For a few seconds, they stayed that way. Azula was the first to pull away, followed by Aang and Zuko. "That was strange. This doesn't leave the saddle, okay?" Azula murmured awkwardly. Ty Lee giggled and Zuko grinned, but Aang said nothing. Aang still felt Katara's, Sokka's, Topha's, and Zuko's arms embracing him. He wished Momo could be there, too. Azula left the saddle to grab Appa's reins, while Ty Lee lay down on her stomach and kicked her legs into the air, approaching the Golden City with a happier outlook. Zuko seemed to notice Aang's change. "What is it, Aang?" "Nothing. I just remembered some things," he gave as his only response. Zuko looked as if he would push the issue but Aang was saved by a declaration from Azula. "We're here." As Aang, Zuko, and Ty Lee looked over the saddle, they noticed the ocean vanishing and solid ground appearing beneath them. The imposing mountain range that seemed so far away for so long had come more clearly into view, dwarfing them on all sides, while smoke belched from the volcanic fields somewhere on the other side of the island. Each peak was enormously wide, with smooth slopes that reminded Aang of old ink paintings and the occasional vein of glowing magma cascading down the mountainsides. It made him think of the warmth and wonder of the Fire Nation from before his time in the iceberg. "So where's the city?" Zuko asked for a moment after they were finished being awed by the landscape. Azula's smile vanished as she considered the question. "It's that way," Ty Lee said, pointing ahead and slightly to their right. "Right behind this mountain." "You've been here before," Azula stated. "Yes," Ty Lee confirmed with a quick nod. "All the better for us." She smirked. Azula directed Appa to fly around the Ashen Mountain in front of them, only to reveal another one, slightly larger. However, down in the valley, Aang spotted hundreds of reddish pagodas similar to the ones in the rest of the Fire Nation archipelago. Aang leaned over the side of the saddle. "There. That's it? Angela asked, barely masking her disappointment. Nope, that's just the outskirts, Ty Lee said. Look, did you see that plume of flame? That's our signal. Go down to them. A firebender! Angela exclaimed. Almost directly below them, seeming to cleave the rows of houses in half, was a gigantic, narrow stone bridge. It led into a tunnel decorated with a gilded archway and blocky carvings etched into it that made Aang think of his adventure in the Sun Warrior City. Several figures stood outside the tunnel and buildings, tiny dots looking up at the flying bison. It was them who shot the signal flame into the air. Appa began to descend. Ty Lee fidgeted, and then shouted out a high-pitched squeal. She shot toward their luggage behind the saddle and dug through the clothing, losing a shirt or two into the sky. What are you doing? Zuko yelped in panic, seeing some of his clothes fly away. Ty Lee gave no answer. In another moment, she found what she was looking for and drew out a long, rich red cloak trimmed in gold. Where'd we get that? Aang wondered aloud. Ty Lee hurriedly put it over her head and drew the hood, concealing her features. You're not a fugitive here, are you? She didn't get a chance to answer because they landed on the bridge, its stonework and construction a rival for Earth Kingdom artisans on the other side of the world. It looked almost ominous, carved from the pumice of the surrounding mountains, but the black rock made the striking gold and marble stand out all the more. Who are you? Said one of the men who unleashed the signal fire. With his hair done up in a phoenix tail and an open vest with no shirt, Aang gasped when he recognized the man as a member of the Sun Warriors. The Avatar is traveling to the Golden City for a fire-bending master. Chief Bato let his words sink into the captains and other chiefs before him, most of which wore formal wolf armor or the other accoutrements of their clans. Seated around a council table, Bato had removed his buffalo yak helm so they could see his face clearly. As the leader of this expedition, he wanted them to read his face, his eyes full of passion. Great speakers and storytellers were highly respected in the water tribes, and revealing his face clearly allowed his audience to relate to him better. It was a favored tactic of Hecata's to speak not as a superior or overlord as his forefathers did, but as one of them. Almost like an equal, rather than an emperor chosen by the spirits. The Fire Nation is strong. They are passionate, willful, and wild. A massive invasion force will be required to topple them, Bato continued. This presents us with, pardon the pun, a golden opportunity. Then let's get the full navy and flood their city, said one captain, clenching a fist. No, no, said Bato, leaning forward in his chair. He gestured over the map spread across the table. The people of the Fire Nation are powerful. Their very landscape is a vicious enemy to us, it is all volcanic fields and mountains. Our water would be difficult to wield in that sort of place. There is a reason why they've stood for 100 years. Then what should we do? Asked a thoughtful chief. The firebenders seek honorable, head-on fights. We will use that to our advantage, with a sneak attack in the night. They will not be ready. Very soon, the Fire Nation will fall just like the air nomads. Though the soldiers and guardians of the city looked exactly like the Sun Warriors, Aang noticed regular civilians on the city's outskirts dressed exactly like noblemen and women of the Fire Nation, each wearing long robes of red, black, and occasionally pink with one or two shoulder spikes. Each person had their hair in a customary topknot or tied back, decorated with a red or gold headpiece. Some even had bald heads with long phoenix tails, like their escort, reminding Aang of a banished Prince Zuko. As they passed, the civilians bowed their heads in greeting, bobbing like turtle ducks in a pond. Aang and the others were led into the dark tunnel, large enough to fit Appa, their only source of light being fireballs held in the palms of the soldiers. Aang and Angela quickly mimicked them, which caused the guards to elicit exclamations of surprise at the two new firebenders in their midst. This mountain is huge, Zuko said, looking at the tunnel walls splashed with firelight. They were carved with ancient murals of dragons and fire, decorated occasionally with inlaid glittering sunstones. Is the city underground? No, one of the guards stated. This mountain used to be a volcano, so the city is situated in the crater. This is the largest volcano in the Fire Nation, and perhaps the world. It is known as Agni's Eye, one of the other guards continued. From above, the circular rim of the volcano and the golden inside makes it look like the sun's great eye. That's amazing, Azula said. The island is even shaped like a sun, Ty Lee stated, drawing all attention to her. Her features were still hidden by her hood. The fires in the palms of the firebenders cast a shadow over her face. Almost round, with peninsulas spiraling outward almost like coronas. Indeed, said the first guard, giving her a sideways glance. Double stone doors appeared out of the darkness, marking the end of the tunnel. They were decorated with two entwined dragons circling a brilliant red sunstone. One of the guards took a step back and thrust a flaming fist into the stone, causing the doors to slowly grind open. "Welcome," he said, as Aang and the others covered their eyes, "to the Golden City." Warm, golden light shined into the tunnel as the doors opened, expanding to present the beautiful city in all of its splendor. The four were nearly blinded by the gold revealed to them. Each building was a piece of artwork, every rooftop gilded to look like dragon claws. The roads had been delicately tiled and made straight and even, inlaid with occasional gold blocks. The white sandstone almost gleamed as much as the gold, but it paled in comparison to the rest of the city's majesty. Aang didn't think he'd ever seen so much wealth in one place before. The Avatar, his friends, and their escorts all walked around Appa as delighted children poked their heads out at the new arrivals, laughing and squealing with joy when they saw Appa. Aang wished he had at least 3 more heads to take in everything all around him. Palm trees lined the roadways and greenery tumbled down from the sides of some buildings like waterfalls. Ivy coiled around gold and bright flowers grew with gemstones. Even the water, spread throughout the city in wide, shallow pools, seemed like molten gold in the sunlight. Only Ty Lee's head was faced forward, her frame looked smaller than usual under her large cloak. A grand statue stood in the middle of the road before them, raised up on a dais. It was a golden figure of a powerful, shirtless man with his hands outstretched, streaming constant fire from his hands into the sky. Small twin golden dragons twisted around his torso, spewing 2 more streams of fire. This seemed to be the central gathering place of the city, its core, everything circled around this statue. People were everywhere, but they all gave the bison and his companions a wide berth. It didn't take long for Aang to realize that their escort meant to bring them straight to the palace as guests of honor. Far ahead, he could see the palace shining like a sun, visible to all of the inhabitants. Azula's eyes shone as bright as the gold around them as she took it all in. "At last," she said. She turned to Aang with a smirk. "Think they'll throw us a big festival? I could use a festival." An island of ice floated in the middle of the ocean, freezing a dozen of Bato's ships together as they waited in place and prepared for their infiltration. In 3 days' time, Bato's plan would begin. He paced across the deck of his ship, his boots padding against the wooden floorboards. All of the ships creaked and groaned with the ice binding them together, but it made the transference of supplies between ships easier. "We're going hunting, men," Bato announced to his sailors. "As such, I'll need the best hunters from each clan present. Under the cover of night, we'll sneak into their city and take it from the inside. Volunteers, stand and step forward, and I will mark you with courage and skill." And now Prince Sokka's crew was under his command for the siege, so that obstacle was out of the way. Lady Kunna was worried about her grandson. He spent hours holed up in his room among his maps, furs, and inventions, brooding and planning and drawing up schematics for various new toys. It was unhealthy, she thought. He needed sunlight and fresh air. He only came out in the evenings for food and training. Hunting the Avatar had become an obsession for Sokka, and it wasn't improving now that the Avatar had returned after 100 years. So with a pie show board tucked under her arm and a tray of his favorite cookies, Kunna marched through the ship's short hallway and into the prince's room after briefly knocking on his door. "I thought my orders were clear," Sokka said plainly. "Don't disturb me." He was sitting lazily upon his chair, spinning a small wooden contraption in his hands as he stared blankly at the world map pinned to his mahogany table. Thankfully, he allowed sunlight to stream into the room through a window, but besides that there was only a dim lantern to illuminate him. As always, his polar bear furs, Arctic hen feathers, and numerous weapons were displayed on his walls. "What are you doing?" Kunna inquired, closing the door behind her. "Trying to think of a plan," he replied. "Please leave." "A plan to do what?" "Now that my crew has left me for Bato." I have to infiltrate the Golden City alone. What? She exclaimed. No grandson of mine is going into something that dangerous. I have a plan forming, he shot back. Just let me think. Before I lose it. When she didn't budge, he glowered at her. Ugh, Gran, come on. It's drifting away. Bato won't let you join the invasion since you denied being under his command, Kunna said, taking a bite out of one of her cookies. But the beginnings of his fleet are still nearby. He is watching you. Then I will take his eye off of me, he said, kicking up his feet and leaning forward with an almost feral grin. I've got an idea. How? Send out this letter, he said, grabbing a brush and ink. He drew out his brush strokes with a flourish, his excitement evident. When he finished, he waved it dry and handed it to Kunna with a smirk. I will fake my own death. The palace throne room was chillingly similar to the one in the old Fire Nation capital that Aang remembered. The sight of the monolithic pillars, the flame burning behind the throne, and the cold marble floors brought back horrible memories that Aang never wanted surfaced again. The only difference this time, though, was the man seated on the throne and the people seated at his sides. One of these people Aang recognized. His pure white hair was neater than usual and tied back into a topknot, but the scrutinizing gaze was unmistakable. Master Zhang Zhang. Aang, Zuko, Azula, and Ty Lee were led into the throne room where they bowed before the Fire Lord. Aang quivered with each step, full of unexpected rage and fear. Ty Lee gave him a furtive glance and it made him wonder if his aura boiled off of him in waves. Luckily, this Fire Lord was not Ozai, so Aang didn't spring on him in uncontrollable, righteous fury. The Avatar does not need to bow to me, said the Fire Lord. You are an honored guest. Thank you. It's great to finally be here, Aang replied respectfully. The sight of the man calmed him. He looked stern but strong, with a fire in his eyes that signified him as a worthy leader of these people. His black hair was tied back in a topknot like the others, but he only had a triple-pronged red headpiece, different from the five-pronged gold one that Aang normally saw on Ozai. Before Aang could say anything further, the Fire Lord's eyes widened. What is it, Fire Lord? Aang asked him, trying to follow his gaze. Was he looking at Azula? I am not the Fire Lord, the leader said, glancing back at Aang. I am simply High Chief Zahan, but that girl is more royalty than I am. And then, he bowed to Azula, closely imitated by Zhang Zhang and the 2 or 3 other men and women behind him. She is the rightful heir of the Fire Nation. Azula yawned. No, I'm not, my uncle technically is. How did you know? Your golden headpiece, the High Chief said, blinking. It was the symbol of royalty in the old Fire Nation. Yes, now it's simply a family heirloom and unfortunately I am not a princess, said Azula. And my brother isn't a prince. Aang remembered them mentioning this to him before, several weeks ago when he first learned of her headpiece. In a different world, if things happened a certain way, Azula would have been a royal tyrant. This thing means nothing now. Our place is not in the Golden City to rule. An interesting group was brought before us. The High Chief mused. The Avatar, the prince and princess of an ancient bloodline, and a hooded figure. I will not allow such rudeness in my throne room. Ty Lee froze in place. Azula crossed her arms. Just do it and listen to him, she said to the other girl. Stop being a wimp. I bet they won't even know or care who you are. If you say so, Azula. Ty Lee sighed, lifting off her hood. There was silence. See? I told you she was nobody important, Azula said smugly to nobody in particular. Princess Ty Lee. 3 sets of eyes widened and turned to their companion as one. Ty Lee fidgeted under their gaze. Hi, Dad, she said meekly. Zuko grasped his forehead as if unable to comprehend the words circling around him. Ty Lee is a princess. Aang's own head was spinning with the irony of the situation. I did not expect to see you return, Zahan said, his visage suddenly becoming cold and detached. Zhang Zhang and the others were silent, calmly regarding the princess before them. Why did you run away? The same reason all my other sisters did. She shouted at the older man, standing at her full height. I didn't want to rule. I wasn't ready. I was never ready. That is your duty, Tai Li, Zhang Zhang finally spoke. As a princess and heir, your duty is to your people. But I was the youngest of 7. She quivered, trying to suppress her conflicting emotions and pains, finally fighting to come to the surface. I never expected having to rule, but when everyone else ran away from home, the responsibility was suddenly thrust on you, Zuko realized, staring at Tai Li with realization and understanding. It was the same for me and Azula once Mom died and Dad went away. Why did all your other sisters run away? Aang asked softly. Same reason I did, they weren't ready to rule. First my oldest sister ran away, and the responsibility kept getting passed on to each of us down the line, until it came to me. I couldn't handle it. Hot tears were streaming down her face. Her head was bowed, trying to hide them from her father. But then you wanted to come back, with us, Azula said. That doesn't make sense. I don't know. I didn't think about what I did until after I left with you guys. It seemed like a perfect opportunity at the time, go home, see if any of my sisters returned, try to fix things with Dad. Her voice faltered. But I knew it was a mistake. She ran from the chamber. Tai Li, wait. Zuko shouted, running after her. Aang turned back to High Chief Zuhen and his fire sages. I'm sorry, we didn't know she even lived in the Golden City. That is quite all right, the High Chief said with a sigh, rubbing his temples. I just hope she doesn't run away again. His voice trailed off. Perhaps I was being unfair to her. Thank you for returning her home. Well, enough of that, Azula said, waving her hand dismissively in Tai Li's vague direction. Aang and I came to find a fire-bending teacher. Have any in mind? Well. Zuhen started. How about him? Aang questioned, pointing directly at Zhang Zhang. He seems powerful. Master Zhang Zhang is the strongest firebender in the whole city, the High Chief said. Azula's eyes lit up. But he does not teach. Doesn't teach who? Aang asked, worried. Would he get into the same fiasco as he did with Pakku and Katara? I do not teach anybody, Zhang Zhang spoke, his voice as tense as ever. Why not? Azula asked, sounding somewhat insulted. I have not yet found a worthy student, said the master firebender. Well, he's the Avatar, Azula gestured to Aang, and I'm his best friend, she reasoned. Aang inwardly chuckled. He decided to sit back and let this event run its course. We are quite worthy. No, Zhang Zhang said flatly. Azula sent one of her piercing gazes at the master. She opened her mouth to speak. As princess of the Fire Nation. You are no princess, Zhang Zhang interrupted, straightening his vest of red, white, and gold. You have admitted as much. Now Azula was starting to get angry. Chief Zuhen, command him to teach me. I am sure you can find another teacher, the High Chief tried to reconcile. Azula set her jaw with determination. I will only learn from the best. You lack patience and discipline, said Zhang Zhang. Go with the other trainees and learn simple breathing and meditation exercises first. Azula fully glared at the fire-bending master. Very well, she said tensely. I will dominate all the other competition and then return for your further judgment. She turned around briskly and left the throne room without a backwards glance. Sorry about her, too, Aang said with a grin. Zuhen chuckled. Be sure to return to the palace tonight, a festival will be thrown in your honor, the High Chief replied. We'll find you a master. Actually, I share Azula's state of mind, Aang stated. I think only Zhang Zhang will do. He noticed the master's slightly amused expression, but he didn't comment. Until tonight, sir, master, Aang said to the chief and the firebender. They nodded and he left. He made a mental note to praise Azula later. Tai Li. Zuko sprinted down the stone steps in front of the palace after the distraught girl. The sun had started to set behind the lip of the caldera, casting the city in shadow. Tai Li, wait. She finally stopped at the base of the steps and sat down, putting her head in her hands. You probably think I'm just a spoiled little rich kid now, don't you? Zuko came to a stop and sat down at her side. That's not true. She laughed. Look at me. I'm crying over nothing. This whole city would be mine. She held out her hands as if to encompass the sea of gold before her. I'm supposed to be happy. But instead you ran away, said Zuko. It's okay. I kind of understand where you're coming from. You do. It was like I said inside, he continued. After Mom died and Dad went off to war, all the responsibility of the village was thrust on the two of us. We had to do all the hunting, the protecting, and even the leading. All we had to help us was our Uncle Iroh. Yes, but apparently you two were doing fine, said Ty Lee. I lived a sheltered palace life ever since I was born. I don't really know how to lead such a huge city. At least you caught a glimpse of the real world, Zuko said. How long ago did you run away? It's almost a year now, she said, letting out a deep exhale. And I guess I was the first one to come back. Maybe I was a little homesick. How many sisters do you have? Did they all go? Zuko asked, surprise edging its way into his voice. Yes. The oldest was Tylka. She ran away first. Then it was Tyluko, and Tyzula followed her. Next was Tyaru, and Miley, and then Susan. Do you know where any of them are? Zuko asked with a frown. No. She curled up into a ball. I mean, I guess I can hope that someone will come home before it's my time to rule. But they don't write or anything. And I know Dad's really worried about all of them. He put his arm around her as a source of comfort. Well, maybe you can stay with us until it's time for you to rule, then we'll come back and support you, he whispered into her ear. She got caught up into his words and turned her head to look into his sincere eyes. They moved as one to kiss each other. Before their lips touched, she pulled away. No, I can't. Why not? I thought you liked me, he said. He couldn't pretend that he wasn't hurt, especially when she stood and stepped away from him. I do, Zuko. Then why can't we be together? Everything was fine before we came here. She'd always been the one to make her feelings known. He couldn't help but run the events of the past few days through his mind, wondering where he might have messed up, but her next words stopped him cold. Because I'm engaged. I'm going to get married. And then she ran away again, but he was unable to follow. The half-metal figure released smashing sounds with every one of his steps, crushing twigs and stone underneath his feet. He walked calmly and openly under the cover of night, ready to complete his assignment. His mission led him to a port city on the edge of the Fire Nation, specifically, a Water Tribe Navy dock. He stopped in front of Prince Sokka's ship. And suddenly, from the eye-shaped tattoo on his forehead, a single ray of light shot to the wooden ship, obliterating a large part of it in an explosion. A second and a third ray followed, engulfing the ship in flames, reducing the ship and anyone on it to ashes and kindling. His mission completed, the combustion man left the scene to collect his pay. The entire Golden City was alive under the nighttime sky, celebrating a festival in honor of the Avatar and their kin from the south. The golden rooftops glittered from the light of the bonfires all around the city, lighting it up even with the dark sky overhead. Zuhan, Aang, Ty Lee, Zuko, and Azula sat at the head of a gigantic table filled with more spicy foods of the Fire Nation than Aang could name. He saw fried squid and fish, rice dishes sizzling in bowls of meat, their juices and spices making his nose sting. Someone heaped a helping of chicken pig adobo braised in soy sauce onto his plate while another spooned boar oxtail and vegetables in a peanut sauce for him. Others offered him sweeter foods made from pineapple or banana. Master Zhang Zhang and two Sun Warriors performed a three-way duel on a raised platform. Azula was entranced by their fire-bending might. Rings of fire circled around each of the three benders. There were theatric flares and sparks, fireballs, acrobatic maneuvers, punches and kicks, and fireworks lit to scream into the air behind them in dazzling displays of color. They ended the show by feeding streams of fire into the center of the platform, causing them to clash in a fiery red inferno. Azula ignored Zuko's brooding, Aang's careful observations, and Ty Lee's uncharacteristic depression. The princess and the High Chief's relationship seemed to be detached and polite in the wake of the day's events. They no longer spoke of Ty Lee's flight or ascension to the throne when she came of age. As Azula watched the mock fire duel on the platform, her eyes widened as she came up with a sudden, if crazy, idea. Unable to wait for the duel to end, she stood up from her seat and approached the platform, speaking loudly to Zhang Zhang and interrupting the duel. "I challenge you to a duel," she bellowed. Everything fell silent as the firebenders halted their performance and looked at her below them, as stunned as anyone else. Only Zhang Zhang, now in a vest with pointed gold shoulders for the show, looked unfazed. Ty Li dropped her chopsticks into her dish with a clatter. "Angela, don't," she called to her friend. "Are you aware of the rules of an Agni Kai?" Zhang Zhang spoke to her coldly. Angela didn't answer and Aang wondered if she'd ever heard of the term in this world. "In an Agni Kai, we fight to the death. They are not taken lightly. If I win, I only want you to teach Aang and me," Angela said proudly. "However, if you are the victor, you may uphold the rules as you wish." Zuko slapped his forehead. "My sister is really smart, but sometimes she's an idiot." Aang rose and jumped clear over the table to Angela's side. "Angela, I'm not letting you fight a battle for me. We'll duel him together. Aang, this is a battle of honor. You don't understand our customs, stay out of it," she said to him a bit harshly, her eyes fixed on the fire-bending master. "Very well," said Zhang Zhang, gesturing to the other Sun warriors to clear the platform. Angela jumped up to take their place, falling into a fire-bending stance. "I accept your challenge. If I lose, I will take on fire-bending students again." The man's face hardened. "Begin." Angela wasted no time, immediately becoming aggressive with 2 quick punches and a kick, releasing 2 fireballs in an arc of flame. Zhang Zhang bent below the balls and cleaved the arc in half with his hand, consecutively releasing a constant stream of fire that circled around Angela and enshrouded her in flames. She thrust her joined hands into the inferno and spread them out, dispersing the attack as she ran closer to her opponent, firing a wave from her palms. Zhang Zhang answered with a colossal wall of fire that covered the whole arena and more, easily absorbing the attack. His younger opponent took him by surprise when she jumped through the wall with a fist of flame, nearly striking him in the face, but he redirected her arm and pushed her to the side. He sent a sweeping kick of fire at her as she fumbled, but she pushed herself off the ground and spun her legs in the air, almost blasting him with a windmill of fire. "Training with her paid off, Aang," Zuko said to the amused Avatar. "Has that been enough to show you how good I am?" Angela asked the old man, smirking. "No," he answered flatly. "You do not exert any control, several times you came close to harming our audience." "Fire is alive, I know that," she interrupted him. He cupped a ball of fire in his hands and hurled it at Angela, who crossed her arms to block the attack, but it still succeeded in pushing her back. Zhang Zhang tucked his arms into his body for a moment and gathered an immense amount of heat, releasing a spinning inferno that covered him in a shield of fire and shot a bolt of flame at Angela. She summoned enough fire to protect herself from the bulk of the attack, but the force still pushed her back again and she went tumbling off of the platform. However, she recovered quickly and jumped back at him, shooting a continuous blaze from her joined fists. Her top knot came undone and her headpiece clattered to the ground. The fire-bending master held both of his hands in front of him, protecting himself from the power of the attack as the fire streamed to his sides, making Aang feel the heat of her attack as he drew in as close to the battle as he dared. Angela didn't stop with the stream of fire, so Zhang Zhang walked closer to her. The heat was becoming more intense for Aang as he came, but the master pushed against her power with fire of his own. She finally cut off the surge of energy as he neared, but he gathered a fireball in his hands from the remnants of her attack and hurled it at her. The concussive attack struck and knocked her backwards again, but this time she was in too much pain to stand and fight more. She groaned from the ground, expecting him to deal the finishing blow. Instead, the fire-bending master was distracted by a glint of gold on the ground and knelt to pick up her headpiece. His eyes widened as he recognized the artifact. "I don't believe it," Zhang Zhang said, his voice full of shock. "What don't you believe?" "You already know about my heritage," Angela shot at him. She slowly sat up, cringing in pain. He gave her one of his characteristic stoic expressions. "Quite honestly, I thought it was a fake. Many counterfeits of this crown have been made over the years, but this specific one has a scratch on the inside from misuse that I know well. You are not only descended from Fire Nation royalty. I know the last person that this headpiece belonged to. I've seen it before. Yeah, earlier, when we first entered the palace, she said scathingly. Are you going to kill me or not? He ignored her. I haven't just seen it. I used to own it. This headpiece used to belong to a man named Iroh, and it was customary back in the days of Fire Nation royalty for the crown prince to give to a trusted friend for safekeeping. It was a form of brotherhood. What? You know my uncle? The young firebender asked. Aang's eyes widened as he recognized the scene. Were the worlds really so similar, at their core, that similar events would play out with entirely different people? You're from the southern archipelago, yes? I lived in your village many years ago. Iroh was my best friend when we were young, but when it was time for us to go off to war when we became of age, I was afraid. I did not believe in the war or our reasons for fighting in it, said Zhang Zhang, staring at the golden headpiece in his palm. What happened? Azula asked, standing. Zuko, Ty Lee, Zuhan, and all the other people at the party were transfixed and silent. Iroh helped me desert and come here, Zhang Zhang continued. I fled in dishonor, but he didn't judge me for a moment. I owe him my life. The soldiers in the village would have beaten me if I refused to join them. I left this headpiece behind, returned to its rightful hands, for I did not believe that I deserved Iroh's brotherhood. I never knew Uncle fought in the war. Zuko said, awed. I have decided, Zhang Zhang said, standing up straight. I will teach you, Azula. I owe your uncle that much. And the Avatar, if he still desires to learn from me. Of course, Master Zhang Zhang, Aang said, bowing respectfully. Zhang Jiang's fiery death rained heavily on his mind. He died in the battle on the day of Sozin's comet, but he had slain many firebenders with his power. This time, he hoped to make it up to him. Azula accepted her headpiece from the master, and surprisingly, she also bowed low. It will be an honor to learn under you. Kunna was let into Bato's chambers in his ship with a mournful expression on her face. The clan chief was seated at a small table sipping tea as she arrived. Lady Kunna, it is a pleasure, he said. Have you accepted my offer? She made a show of sniffling into her handkerchief. I'm sorry, Chief Bato, she croaked. The grief from Sokka's death is still heavy on me. Then you should join the invasion and witness my glorious victory over the remnants of the Fire Nation out of revenge for our lost wolf. Your healing skills are renowned throughout the Water Nation, and your help would be imperative to victory. Heal all of our wounded and prevent any lives from being lost, in honor of our venerable prince, he said as she sat down at the table. She drank a warm cup of tea which helped to settle her nerves. Do you know anything of the attack? He asked her. Or who was behind it? You have my deepest sympathies. The Emperor will not take this lightly. Yes. The assassin known as the Combustion Man was behind it. We've run into him before, she said softly. However, I will help you in your conquest in the name of my beloved grandson. She raised her cup of tea in a toast. To the Water Nation. To victory. Aang and Zhang Zhang were in silent meditation as the sun rose, centering the heat in their bodies. They sat together on a dais overlooking the city, stylized golden statues of blocky dragons flanking them on either side. Aang felt some trepidation about the prospect of learning from Zhang Zhang again, but he hoped he was more patient this time. Azula burst onto the scene with fire raging in her hands, kicking and whirling as she practiced forms from their old fire-bending scroll. Zhang Zhang sighed. You really do not know the value of quiet meditation, do you? Not right now, she said. I feel the fire burning within me. It wants out. Don't you feel it too, Aang? I do, said Aang, opening one eye and trying to hide his grin. But, Master Zhang Zhang is a big fan of sitting still and breathing. We should probably follow his lesson. She rolled her eyes, but grinned and sat down next to him. Very well, but when are we starting with complex fire-bending forms? Chapter 19, The Golden Siege, Part 1. He bent backwards under the crimson stream of fire as it passed dangerously close to his face, the heat rolling over his body and ruffling his clothes like wind. He curved his back and rolled to his feet, retaliating with a similarly powerful blast from his fists. He managed to make it curve, which was quite possible from the distance. his opponent charged fire at her two fingertips and exploded the inferno at him, eating up his smaller attack and proceeding to charge toward him. The young man, in defense, summoned a thick wall of fire that circled around him and acted as a shield, protecting him from the blast. "You are being too flashy. Use precision," their teacher yelled at them. A normal-sized fireball burst from the girl's fingertips as she heeded her master's advice, centering on the younger man before her. She sent a smaller, quicker flame at him, hoping to disorient her opponent. However, he leapt high above both blasts and retaliated from the air. "Hey, not fair. He's using airbending," Angela shouted. Aang landed and kept his firebending stance. "No, I'm not. I just jumped high," he answered with a smirk. She glared at him, hurling a fireball meant for distance and power. Aang thrust his palm forward in response at the fireball, shooting a continuous, powerful stream of fire from his hands. He followed his own attack as it was flying toward her, jumping forward into a double front flip and shooting another blast from his joined feet. Angela managed to create a shield of fire in time, but the force of the blast still caused her to slide backwards. She retaliated quickly, firing another shot that exploded at his feet. He was thrown back, but recovered by backflipping in the air, landing neatly on the ground. She spun twice, following up on the attack and kicking two arcs of flame at him. Aang responded with complex hand movements and a lifting motion, summoning a wall of fire that easily absorbed her attacks. He then converted it into an attack and pushed it at her, but she poked her hands through it and dissipated the wall. She rushed at the avatar with daggers of fire in her hands, swinging them as if she practiced fighting with knives all her life. He was taking a further step back with each dodge, but he managed to jump far enough away to attack her with a blazing disc of fire. She dodged, extending her daggers into whips and swinging them at Aang from a longer range. He was able to jump and dodge around them, but a massive blast of fire destroyed her whips. "That is enough," said Zhang Zhang, interrupting their practice session. Both Angela and Aang gratefully accepted the brief respite, hunching over and drawing deep breaths. "You two have progressed further than any student I ever taught in the past. Because of your fierce determination, you are both almost ready to become masters." "Almost," Angela sighed. "We've been working so hard." She was forced to tie her hair back up into a restricting topknot. She was sweating too much from all the fire bending. Aang fell flat on the ground, staring up at the clear blue sky. His chest was rising and falling with his continued deep breaths. He was mastering fire bending far quicker than he mastered water bending in his own world, but this time he had the advantage of foreknowledge. All of his previous skills and techniques were coming back to him. It was as if he had to exercise his bending muscles to get all of his strength to return. It was why he was mastering fire bending so fast. But Angela, she didn't have that foreknowledge. She was progressing this quickly from her own skill. She was a true prodigy. "The two of you have been harnessing the destructive powers of fire bending," their master explained. "Fire is the element of harmony in life." "Well, there are two sides to it," Aang said. He knew this already. "There's the destructive side and the life harmony side. We're just using both." Zhang Zhang sent him a piercing glare with his hands folded behind his back. "Are you trying to tell me about my own art? Have you witnessed the true destruction that fire can bring? If you allow your fire bending to go out of control, it can consume you." Aang glared right back at him. He had seen both sides of fire bending. It wasn't his master's right to assume. Angela sighed again. "But we're better than that." It was Zhang Jiang's turn to sigh. "This is why I have not accepted a fire-bending student in many years. They are all concerned about dominating their enemies with pure power. You must understand the warmth and life of fire before you can become true masters." Zhang Zhang began to walk away. "Now meditate on that." Angela rolled her eyes. "He's just going to leave us here for another 3 hours again, isn't he? Meditate." Zuko and Ty Lee were walking together in circles around the golden fire fountain. However, the acrobat was balancing on the stone basin, standing slightly taller than him. "Isn't this fun?" Ty Lee asked. "We're just hanging out, as friends." "Yup. As friends," Zuko confirmed, though he didn't enjoy saying it. "Only as friends," Tai Li stated. Just a platonic relationship, Zuko reaffirmed. No romantic feelings whatsoever, nuh-uh. Yeah, because you are engaged in all. They both stared at each other. This isn't going to work, they said at the same time. Tai Li sighed and sat, downcast. I'm sorry, Zuko. It's fine, but I don't fully understand. He said, though he was lying. He wasn't fine. Aren't arranged marriages a water tribe tradition? Yeah, she said. But I'm royalty. My dad needs to marry me off someday, so I can rule the city with my husband. Zuko sat down next to her. I don't get the freedom of choice like everybody else does. That's part of the reason why you ran away, isn't it? Zuko asked. You don't even love him, do you? That's not the point, Tai Li said, shaking her head. It's my duty. I've been engaged to the guy ever since I was born. Who is he? Zuko asked. Just the son of some nobleman. Do you even like him? He questioned, frowning. He is so full of himself, Tai Li admitted. Our parents tried to get us to play together once or twice when we were kids, but he was sorta annoying and immature and we kind of fought a lot. Now, we barely even talk. Sounds like it'll be a happy marriage, Zuko commented sarcastically. Well, I'm not marrying him until I'm old enough, said Tai Li. I'm only 14 now. They sighed together. I guess there's nothing we can do, for now I guess, said Zuko. As part of the Southern Water Tribe royal family, Kunna had the privilege that no other women had. She was able to join Admiral Bato on the flagship's observation deck. As head of the division of healers, Kunna was privy to all of the planning and was even supposed to be on the front lines of any battle, as all healers were. However, all women were forbidden to fight. As if Kunna ever listened to that particular rule. Bato stood regally with his hands behind his back as the flagship neared the small continent known as Agni's Eye. Kunna knew full well of all the mysticism and lore surrounding the island, but Admiral Bato seemed to ignore it completely. Somehow, Bato was able to obtain a modern, up-to-date version of Fire Nation armor typical of a standard soldier, which he was currently wearing. 10 other waterbenders, disguised as a random assortment of Fire Nation citizens, some were in robes, others in Sun Warrior uniforms or armor, were going to infiltrate the city with him. Secretly, Sokka was among them. The Water Prince was garbed in a heavy red and gold cloak, heavily hiding his features even from Bato. Half of his face was even covered with cloth for extra protection. If the hood somehow fell off of his head, only his sharp blue eye would be revealed. Sokka was safe, for now. Tonight and tomorrow, the Water Nation will finally emerge victorious in the war over the Fire Nation, Bato spoke to his team. We will take away the greatest weapon of the Firebenders. They will be defenseless. Kunna's eyes widened. What do you mean? Bato wore a clever smirk. While studying under General Pakun in the Earth Kingdom, I came across an ancient library. While there, I discovered scrolls detailing the fall of the spirits of fire into the mortal realm. What are you going to do? Kunna asked, her eyes wide with horror. I am going to destroy their own means of destruction, Bato said, chuckling to himself. Those spirits will regret coming to the mortal world. Our world. Do not tamper with the spirits, Bato. You'll get in over your head. Kunna warned. That is tricky and dangerous business. I'm warning you for your own good. I will not take advice from a sniveling woman who claims to have gone to the spirit world. I did not take you on this conquest to give me counsel, he said sternly. Kunna was forced to keep her mouth shut and bow. Yes, Bato. I will stay in my place, she said quietly. Sokka clenched his fists. Good, good. Bato turned to one of his regular soldiers, not part of the elite team. Commander, tell the Navy to prepare for battle. If my men and I are not back by noon tomorrow, commence the attack on the city. The full moon is on our side tonight. Zuko and Tai Li sat together for a long time, not uttering a single word. Zuko finally looked up from his thoughtful reverie when he noticed the world was quiet and night had fallen. Most of the citizens were gone, asleep in their homes. Tai Li, we should go, Zuko said to her. Come on. I'll walk you home. She nodded quietly, her eyes lowered and her hands wringing nervously in front of her. They walked through the city of gold for a long time before she said anything. Look, Zuko. I'm sorry about everything. What do you need to be sorry about? Zuko asked her, perplexed. Everything, my responsibilities are getting in the way of everything. I didn't want this to happen, I never planned on it. I don't know how I'll be able to choose. I don't know if we can be together. What are you saying? Of course we can. He protested. Who cares if you're a princess? I'm heir to the Fire Nation, aren't I? We should be fine together, we can both rule. That's just wishful thinking, Zuko. A hopeless dream. It'll never happen, she said sadly. Ty Lee, this isn't like you. The two stopped at a fork in the neat stone roads, caught passing by an empty alley. The moon was shining bright tonight, almost a perfect circle. They both took a moment to look up at the shining orb. And Ty Lee's feet were dragged out from under her. She cried out and reached for the boy. Ty Lee! Zuko shouted, reaching towards the girl as she was dragged into the dark alley. Zuko drew his broadswords and rushed after her. Things were eerily quiet in the shadows. He called for Ty Lee again, but there was no answer. His silver swords were shining. Suddenly, he spotted a movement to his right, and he turned his head just in time to see a shining blue globule of water illuminated by the moon. The sphere crashed into his side, ramming him into the wall of a building. Waterbenders! He shouted inside of his head. Two more seemed to appear from the darkness, dressed like Fire Nation citizens. What were they doing? Where was Ty Lee? Before he could figure out anything further, a tendril of water was lashed out at the boy. He rolled to the side, dodging the blow, but one of the other waterbenders shot a puddle on the ground. Zuko was just able to dodge ice spikes by pushing himself back off the ground with his hand. Without losing his momentum, the boy streaked toward the third soldier ready to strike him with an uppercut. The soldier tried shooting him with a bullet of water from his satchel, but the swordsman sidestepped and swung his sword at the man's unprotected shoulder. He left that soldier alone for a moment to get the one that was closest to him. He ran toward the man, who tried creeping a ray of ice in the direction of his feet, but Zuko jumped above the attack and hit him in the face with a double spinning kick. He was knocked unconscious immediately, but before Zuko could regain his balance, the first waterbender struck him in the air with a water bullet. The swordsman crashed against the ground, but it knocked him near the soldier with the cut shoulder. From the floor, Zuko wheeled his feet above his head, striking the soldier 2 or 3 times in the midsection. He went down. Before the first waterbender could hurl more water at him, Zuko threw one of his own broadswords. The man knocked the blade aside with a stream of water, which was what Zuko intended. His broadswords were not made for stabbing. Instead, Zuko's freed hand passed by his pocket and threw 3 knives with pinpoint accuracy, hitting him in the sleeves and pinning him against the stone wall. Prior to his recovery, Zuko ran at him with his remaining broadsword. The man cringed, expecting to be killed, but the younger fighter simply hit him in the face with the hilt of his weapon, knocking him unconscious. His work finished, Zuko bent down to pick up his sword and pluck his knives from the wall, causing the waterbender to crumple to the floor. All 3 soldiers were unconscious. What's going on here? A voice asked hurriedly, rushing into the alleyway. Zuko's eyes widened upon seeing him, topknot, sleeveless vest, blood-red shorts and all. Chan was here. Chan seemed just as surprised to see Zuko. What are you doing here? He asked distastefully. Zuko spotted a dark bruise which was still on his cheek, and he smirked, satisfied. I should ask the same of you, Zuko replied gruffly, sheathing his broadswords. Chan's own longsword was on his hip. Zuko remembered their duel in the tournament well, a battle Zuko had won. I live here, Chan responded in the same manner. They stared each other down for a good moment, but then Chan seemed to recall why he was there in the first place. What the hell happened here? Waterbenders attacked, Zuko said darkly. They've infiltrated the city. They took Ty Lee. Let me go. Ty Lee struggled against her bonds, but with her wrists and ankles both tied, she couldn't do a thing. The rope was cutting painfully into her skin, rubbing her wrists raw. What do you want? Shut up, you little brat, Bato silenced her. Half a dozen of his soldiers were still with him, one or two of them disabled for the moment, because of the little princess. It took all of them to fight her off and hold her back. "You're the princess of the Golden City, take a guess." Ty Lee stopped struggling for a moment, and screwed her face up in concentration. I don't know." Bato slapped his forehead. "You're a suitable hostage, you idiot." "Oh," she exclaimed softly. "That sorta makes sense. You're kinda creepy though." Bato stared at her blankly. She'd be a good insurance plan, as long as his plan worked. "Your father will have to make a choice, the life of his daughter, or his city." "No." Ty Lee shouted, her face becoming angry. "I would die for my city." "Oh, but would your father make the right decision?" he asked, his eyes glinting. Everything was falling into place, this girl was just a boon. Behind him, masquerading as one of his hooded waterbenders, Sokka crept away from the group into the night. Zuko was able to notify the High Chief of the Golden City in time. In response, Zuhen called in all the defenders of the metropolis. Many Sun warriors and soldiers in standard Fire Nation uniform were congregated in the central hall of Zuhen's palace. Aang, Azula, and Zuko were quiet as he spoke. "This will be one of our greatest moments," Zuhen began, speaking loudly. All eyes and ears were on him. "As many of you know, a massive water tribe fleet is on our waters. They will stop at nothing, except death, until we are out of their way. Fight hard, everyone. Fight with the fire in our hearts. Our strength will prevail. We will eradicate the water tribes from our fiery land. To victory." Some men and women had tears in their eyes. Some were tense and expecting many faces to disappear forever. However, everyone cheered at his words. Quietly, so no one else could hear him, Zuhen spoke to Zuko. "Come with me. I have a special mission for you." Aang and Azula nodded at their friend and brother as he stood up to stand by Zuhen and Zhang Zhang. "What is it?" Zuko asked him. Chan suddenly appeared at the High Chief's side. "I want the two of you to find my daughter and keep her safe." The sun was rising. It was a new day. "The quietness before battle is deafening," Zuhen said privately to Aang, sitting on Appa, as they waited for their soldiers to finish preparations. The two were sitting in front of the Golden Palace, overlooking the shining sea of gold before them. They could not see the ocean. Aang felt constricted and tense. They would not immediately know when the water navy was coming. "I'm used to it," Aang said gruffly. Zuhen sent him a questioning look. "I was there when my people were attacked. But I couldn't save them. Maybe things will be different this time." Aang didn't voice it, but he was thinking on a much larger scale than just this battle. Zuhen nodded. "I hope so." Aang gripped Appa's reins. "Well, I better get going now. I'll see their numbers and I'll try to hold them back as long as I can." And, after double-checking to see if his sword was at his side, he soared into the sky on his bison's back, over the crater's rim and past the gigantic mountain. But there were already water tribe soldiers climbing up the mountain. The city was eerily silent as Zuko and Chan returned together back to where Ty Lee was kidnapped. Zuko did not like this turn of events, but he was trying to find Ty Lee, and he would do anything to complete his task, even work with his bitter rival. Chan, as usual, was annoying and full of himself, thinking he could recover Ty Lee alone. "She's my fiancée, man. I should be saving her," Chan said once. "What?" Zuko roared, turning on the other teenager. "Ty Lee has to marry you." "Yeah, what's the big deal?" Chan asked unflinchingly. Zuko took a deep, calming breath and turned away from him. "Nothing, let's just keep looking." Azula was at the front of the palace, hating every moment she could not be out there fighting with Aang. His stupid logic said she would be safer in the city while he fought the soldiers on the mountain, alone, and try to prevent them from entering. She could not believe how stupid he was being. He left her behind to fight with all the other Golden City forces, if they ever infiltrated the natural walls of the volcano's rim. She was torn between dismissing him and his stupidity and ripping her hair out in worry. Why did he make her feel this way? Almost as if on cue, Aang seemed to materialize in the sunlight. First, he was a shadowed blob, but as he neared, she was able to identify the avatar on his bison. He landed right in front of her, but Zhen rushed over to the scene. What happened? Angela asked him sharply. You're back early. He was panting and sweating. There's too many of them. A cold weight dropped into her stomach. If the avatar couldn't help them, who could? They have too many catapults, too much water that they're carrying with them, Aang continued. There are so many marching up to the mountain. I blew some of them off, but they kept coming back. They don't need the navy. They outnumber us already. And then a massive block of ice sailed into the city, crashing into stone and obliterating a building. More followed from the catapults perched on the mountain. That meant that the portion of the city outside of the volcano must have been attacked already. They were being overrun. Soon, the troops would storm in through the main entrance. The Golden City couldn't risk shooting their own fireballs outside of the volcano, they might end up hitting the poorer townspeople outside. Do you have any ideas? Zhen asked hopelessly. Aang thought for a moment, but then something clicked. He seemed cautious, but excited. Are there any spirits nearby? Aang mentally cheered as Zhen nodded and told him of the most spiritual place in the city. He began to lead them to the back of the palace. Aang had a plan, he wondered what would await him there. Everything depended on what would happen once he got there. Was it a spirit oasis? Something else? He needed to talk to Koh. Or some other ancient spirit. It didn't matter. Are you going to ask the spirits for some powerful spirit bomb attack? Angela asked eagerly. Aang laughed. No, but some wisdom would be nice, he answered. She visibly deflated in response. Aang. Angela. Three heads turned to Zuko, who was running toward them and shouting their names. What are you doing? What's going on? Where is my daughter? Zhen immediately interjected. I don't know, Zuko said to him quickly. Chan gave up on the search. I don't know where he went, but there's no sign of her. You're giving up, too? What if she's in danger? Zhen asked aggressively. She's not, said Aang confidently. Since she was kidnapped, they probably want to use her as a hostage or something. They might want either gold or the city. Gold is fine. The city, not so much, said Zhen. We won't let that happen, but either way, they'll contact us first, Aang said. She'll be fine until then. There's something more important now. Zhen sighed. Ty Lee is very important to me. Well, you certainly gave her a warm welcome, Angela said sarcastically. I know, Zhen said sadly. Ty Lee has so much on her shoulders. She deserves so much more. Her responsibility extends past just the needs of the city. What do you mean? Zuko asked. This is it. I will explain when we get to the altar, Zhen said flatly. Zuko and Angela nodded. Aang almost fell over. Where is it? Angela asked. What is it? As soon as Angela asked her question, a grand, golden door became visible to them. It was inlaid with glittering rubies and sunstones, and etched runes dictating an ancient man surrounded by two dragons, blowing fire from their maws. 3 cylindrical tubes spouted from the door. It was a lock. And fire bending was the key. Aang, Angela, and Zhen seemed to think of this with a shared mind. And, as one, they all moved to blow fire into the tubes. Slowly, the door began to grind open, and the sight they saw elicited 3 gasps. The first thing that dominated their view was a T-shaped structure, except that it was enormous. It was actually a grand, steep staircase with walkways on the top that led into 2 opposite tunnels. On the floor, at the base of the stairs, was a series of watery canals that coiled around the middle, then spread outwards. Standing in the middle, Aang realized that the water formed the shape of the sun, if it were to be viewed from above. This is the dragon altar, Zhen told them. And then it hit the airbender, this was the location of the last 2 dragons in his world. Are there really dragons here? Angela looked around eagerly, as if one of them were to pop out at her. Yes, the last 2, Zhen stated. The rest were killed at the beginning of the war, fighting with the firebenders on the front lines. Why are firebenders so close to the dragons? Angela asked. I saw murals of them all over town. Firebenders originally learned from the dragons, Azula, Aang said, remembering that tidbit of information. They admired their majesty and inner strength and made it their own, Zuhan added. So where are they? Azula asked grudgingly. In their tunnels, obviously, Zuko stated. He turned to Zuhan. So what were you saying about Ty Lee? He seemed slightly afraid to ask. The High Chief sighed. She has a terrible responsibility on her shoulders, one I would not like to see carried out. Aang held his breath. When she was born, she was terribly sick. We knew she wasn't going to live. It was coming. She was our youngest daughter of 7, and we were deeply saddened by the news. The fire sages told us to offer her body to Agni, the first dragon living in the sky and the sun. She was placed on top of this altar. Aang, Zuko, and Azula were silent. Then, to our astonishment, the 2 dragons burst from their lairs and flew in circles around her, Zuhan said. We didn't know what was happening. We were afraid to go and retrieve the baby. And suddenly, they perched on the sides of the altar, and blew fire at my daughter. Zuko's eyes were wide. Azula was indifferent. Aang expected something like that. We thought they burned her to a crisp as punishment, but instead, the fire seemed to be life-giving. They rejuvenated her and gave her the strength to overcome her sickness. Now, Ty Lee literally lives with the spirit of fire inside of her. And that was what Aang needed to know. He moved to the center of the water sun and sat on the ground, pushing his fists together. Aang, what are you doing? Azula asked, staring at him oddly. I'm meditating. I need to be in the spirit world. I'll be right back. We don't have much time. He closed his eyes. When they opened again, they were glowing with the power of the Avatar spirit. That was quick. Zuko commented. We'll protect Aang, Azula said, half to Zuhan and half to herself. We can't let anybody get to his physical body, or he won't be able to find his way back. The heavily robed man seemed very interested. Go find Chan, the High Chief said to Zuko. He should help, since he ran off earlier. With the Water Tribe forces in the city, you'll need all the help you can get. Zuko didn't seem too happy about it, but he acquiesced. Zuko quickly witnessed the destruction of the Golden City firsthand. The waterbenders stormed into the city, using all 4 of their water skins to rip down any opposition. And since they entered the city, more water was available to them. They were intimidating in their wolf-like armor. However, the Fire Nation soldiers rose up against them, wielding spears and swords in their element. Komodo rhinos clashed with buffalo yaks. They were passionate and true to their name, they each carried a bit of the spirit of Agni. Was Chan down there somewhere? Or was he hiding like a coward? Were the other major players of this game present at the Golden City? Were Bato and Sokka there? Aang's body was motionless and he was silent. Azula stared at the boy, his shaggy dark hair covering his head and most of his arrows, his glowing eyes, his clothes, so reminiscent of a firebender's. As she watched, she protected. And she was prepared for anything. With the sun on her back, she now felt that she could conquer any foe. You don't have to worry, Aang, she said to him quietly, clenching her fist. She seemed to forget Zuhan was still there. I'll protect you. You really think so, don't you? Azula's head spun to the direction of the voice. She let out a small gasp of surprise and immediately took a controlled firebending stance. She should have expected this. I'm not surprised to see you, Sokka, she answered. I'll go find Zuko. Zuhan said to Azula, rushing past Sokka unhindered to go get help. Aang was Sokka's target. Azula was just in the way. The firebender was the first to attack, shooting rapid fireballs from her pointed fingers. Azula wanted to dam the streams of water all around her and Aang, it would serve to be her disadvantage. And Sokka took full use of them, calling up a wall of water to block her attack. It circled around him and returned at her, but she spread her arms wide and evaporated the attack with a wall of fire. The red blockade stretched into the sky, where it dissipated with nothing left to burn. Sokka attacked now, running at her as he gathered water behind him, ready to send it in a rush at the girl. Azula could not dodge, Aang was behind her and the attack would hit him. So she simply rose to the challenge with a blast of fire aimed at the water prince, but the liquid swirled in front of him and blocked the blow. He sent it at her once, which was blocked, and then spun it at her again, which was also stopped with another wall of fire. Sokka was slightly short of breath. "You filthy savage. You've found a master, haven't you?" She simply smirked in reply. She punched, kicked, and blew flames at him, but with solid footing he slid water across the floor, blocking every one of her attacks. They were extremely close to each other now. She had the advantage of close combat. Fire wreathed her fist as she sent a solid punch at the waterbender. He blocked the brunt of the blow with a watery defense, but the force of it still pushed him back. Azula took a deep breath, feeling the power of the sun enhancing her strength. She shot a stream of fire from her right hand, but extended it and thinned it, turning it into a whip as she pulled it away from Sokka. She twisted and coiled it in the air, sending each concentrated lash at the waterbender. She had him on the run. She was winning. It felt glorious, she felt powerful. Sokka suddenly found time to stop, raising his arms and causing water to rush at the firebender from both sides. She surrounded herself in a dome of fire, protecting her from attack, but when she lowered it she saw ice spikes levitating on either side. They rushed in at her. Regular fire would not be enough to melt them in time. A simple shield wouldn't protect her from the piercing attacks. It was feeble to try and protect herself. But Azula wasn't the type to give up. She pointed her fists at the clusters of ice spikes and forced as much fire from them as she could. The heat from the flames she was expelling overwhelmed her, but she needed more, faster, before the spikes could reach. She pumped more heat and more energy into the flames. And, quite suddenly, the golden fire turned an electric blue. She was glowing brighter than any other fire in the dimming sunlight. Azula smirked again. The ice spikes were obliterated. She shot a torrent of the blue fire into the air, only exerting a little more energy than normal to maintain it, and dragged the fire down to the ground, right on top of Sokka. He threw himself onto his back, summoning a large amount of water to dispel the attack, causing a hiss of steam to rise from his form. Sokka was still able to stand. He wore a look of pure rage as he looked at the girl, his single blue eye narrowed to a slit. And then they both realized something. Night had fallen. The moon was releasing silver light above, full and bright. Now it was Sokka's turn to smirk. Water rose on all sides of Azula, storming out of the sun design, glowing ethereally with blue. She could not hope to combat Sokka's full power under the full moon. Before she could react, the whole torrent of water clashed with her and threw her against the stone ground, unmoving. When the water and steam from her feeble defense cleared, Azula's head swimming, she saw Sokka standing victoriously over her, holding Aang by the collar of his shirt. He had won. As she was swimming in and out of consciousness, Sokka spoke. "You rise with the sun. I rise with the moon." Several hours later, well into the night, Azula awoke. The first thing she did, of course, was to search around, panicked. Where was Aang? Sokka had taken him, she had failed. The Avatar was taken right out from under her. She still wasn't strong enough. Check the description for the links to the author.